my channel. My name is Martine, and if you are new here, I do videos on Vedic astrology mainly, but also with some tropical insights, and I focus on both relationship and natal astrology. And if you like this video and you would like to see more content from me, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to my channel. Also consider clicking the notifications bell if you want to see when I will post a new video. Also, if you are interested in a private reading, I do readings in astrology on a variety of topics ranging from relationship readings to career to transits for 2-3 years, or solar return charts or predictions for 1 year, etc. You are free to email me at the email address that I will leave in the video description, and I can send you a pricing list and reading options and any other details that you might require. Also, I want to mention that I have started membership options on this channel, and the short of it, just to give you the short perks that you will get if you choose to join the membership section, you will get 1 extra video per month for each membership stage or tier. So for the first tier, you will get 1 extra video per month. For the second tier, you will get 2 extra videos per month, so you will have access to level 1 and level 2 videos. And for level 3 or third tier, you will get 3 extra videos per month. The level 1 and level 3 videos are going to be on a variety of topics, so basically anything related to astrology, but it will be content that is not shown on my regular usual videos, right? So this is members only exclusive content, and it can range from, tips and tricks on how to read a horoscope to, I haven't done this yet, but I plan on doing maybe members only astrological synastry for famous couples, for instance, or the analysis of famous people's horoscopes, but then I can also get into divisional charts, etc., etc. So all kinds of things. The level 1 or second tier of membership options is especially related to synastry astrology topics, meaning relationship-oriented astrology. So this could be things like how to discover which kind of partner archetype is right for you according to your horoscope, or it could be, again, different characteristics, whether you're going to have a good marriage according to your horoscope or a less than stellar marriage. But you can find more concrete examples in the lists that you will find in the video description, because I have added the playlists where you can already see all the videos that I have posted in each members section. So yeah, you can see what videos you will have access to from the ones that I have already done. But I will continue to post, like I said, 1 extra video per month for each level of membership. And in addition to that, in the members only section, you will have access to members only polls, and you will also have priority when it comes to getting your comments replied to on my channel. And you will also have stickers that basically show up next to your username that show that you are a member, and a couple of exclusive emojis. All right, so that's pretty much all the perks that you can have as a member on my channel. If you're curious, you can check the video description for more details as well, or you can click the join button under any of my videos to also see the prices, because the prices will be shown in your local currency. All right, in addition to the members only section, I also have a tarot channel, and I post there semi-regularly, and I will be linking the tarot channel in the video description as well as in the pinned comment. It's called Martine's Tarot. So if you are curious about tarot, if you're into it, maybe check out my channel, maybe subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you very much for listening to this intro. And now I'm going to get straight into today's topic. Hello and welcome to my channel. Welcome to another astrology video from me. So today's topic, as the people have voted, is going to be about the synastry / relationship analysis of Tim Burton and Helena Bonham Carter. Now, I do want to start by saying that I have already spent probably about over 2 hours, or maybe an hour and a half. I'm not sure exactly. Okay, counting a few breaks, I guess an hour and a half to 2 hours. Just looking into information about this couple, and more specifically looking into information that could help me determine Helena Bonham Carter's approximate, at least, date of birth, because as you may know, you probably already realized that if you voted in the poll that I had on my community page probably more than a week ago, where a lot of you voted that you want to see this couple most out of the options that I listed there. Helena Bonham Carter, yeah, does not have an official time of birth given. So, because I don't like to just go into it blindly and, choose a random time of birth, I wanted to narrow down the possibilities of her time of birth, and I am pretty confident, okay, based on my experience, my intuition, the information that I found about her, about the time of birth that I found. Pretty confident. Okay, not 100% because 100% would be if I had actually known her time of birth, right? But yeah, I would say with 80 to 90% confidence, this is the time of birth that she has, roughly. And I'm gonna spend some time in the introduction to talk a little bit about her horoscope and why I think she has this time of birth, why it makes sense to me. All right. So feel free to, comment in the comment section with ideas or objections that you have to my analysis and why I decided upon this time of birth. But like I said, based on my very many years of experience, just to remind you, over 20 in reading horoscopes and over 10 in reading Vedic astrology horoscopes, I am pretty confident that this is the time of birth that she has. So I'm gonna get straight into it. So first of all, I started by, this is how I try to narrow down an interval. I started by checking the horoscope at the extremities of the day. So that means that I do a horoscope for roughly after midnight and roughly before midnight the next day. And this is to see if the moon sign changes or any other signs of other planets change. The ascendant is definitely going to change because that changes roughly once an hour or so. But I want to see if, first of all, the moon sign changes, because that one, will change roughly every 2.5 days. And unfortunately, in her case, yes, it changes, right? So if she had been born at midnight, she would have had moon in Cancer. If she was born after roughly 1 p.m., she has moon in Leo, more specifically in Magha Nakshatra. And so this right off the bat gave me a very strong hint that she was born right after 1 p.m. Why do I say this? Because if she had had her moon in Cancer, that would have made her an Ashlesha moon. And now, again, feel free to contradict me, of course, but I have dealt with, I don't know, hundreds, thousands of horoscopes, people that I've analyzed, and I've known a lot of Ashleshas in person, etc. And Helena Bonham Carter strikes me as someone who has too intense of an energy to have a moon in Ashlesha. Other placements in Ashlesha maybe could have been possible, but not her moon. I don't think so. So right off the bat, moon in Magha made a lot more sense to me. And I should start by saying that I didn't even look over their synastry too much, except glimpsing over it after I did her whole time of birth rectification thing. And the reason I mentioned this is because after I did her birth rectification, I noticed some things in their synastry that kind of made a lot of sense. But I'm going to hold that thought for once I start the synastry analysis. Either way, I definitely, to me, it does look that Helena Bonham Carter is definitely a Magha moon. Because she has a certain kind of intensity, she also has an energy that comes across as just slightly more masculine than average, in the sense of not masculine as in she has a beard or something, obviously, but an intense energy, which is very typical for Magha, which has a male yoni. Okay, Magha is ruled by the male rat animal, which symbolizes the instinctive energy of a person and also hints towards sexual compatibility and synastry. And yes, she also has this very instinctive vibe to her, which again would make sense for a Ketu sort of energy, and Magha is ruled by Ketu. Ashleshas, especially Ashlesha women that I have come across, especially when Moon is in Ashlesha, they tend to come across as a lot more detached, and they tend to have a cultivated sort of sensuality about them where they know how to, for lack of a better word, play on their feminine wiles and be seductive. And they tend to be much more slower and deliberate in their movements. And also physically, when it comes to their faces as well, they tend to be just more, I don't know how to say it. I guess I'm trying to, think of words that don't sound offensive because, I don't see the, how should I put it? Like, as an astrologer, and I'm sure many of you who have been listening to my videos for years, that I just have a different view of the world than the average person. So I was thinking like snake-like because, Ashlesha is connected to snakes. But I don't see that as a bad thing. I mean, snakes, when you think about it, first of all, are difficult to read, all right? Snakes literally don't have the capacity to blink, just to give an example. So Ashleshas are known to have a very hypnotic stare, and they're known to be very alluring and seductive in their energy, which, again, kind of makes me think of a snake. Some examples I can think about: Lana Del Rey, Moon in Ashlesha, Megan Fox, Moon in Ashlesha, Marilyn Monroe, Ascendant in Ashlesha. Can't think of any others right now, but tons of them, because I remember reading, and like I said, I'm not just talking about famous people, also people that I've met in real life. So, from my perspective, 100% Helena Bonham Carter has Moon in Magha Nakshatra. So that puts her time of birth after 1 p.m. right off the bat. And now, why did I decide upon Ascendant in Virgo? Well, the next option would have been to have Ascendant, for her to have Ascendant in Leo. However, that would have put her Moon in her Ascendant. Now, again, I could be off, of course, because a horoscope has an infinity of energies working together, and your job is to kind of, swim through the waves of nuances of a horoscope and see where the brush strokes are, concentrated in one point or another and point towards a certain pattern that you can identify, that you can name. That's the best way that I can explain it. I have another analogy with the pixels on a screen, but I won't get into that right now. Maybe some of you remember it from other videos. But without getting too philosophical about, the art of reading an astrological horoscope, the point is, based on, again, people that I've known who have Moon/Cancer energy on the ascendant, on the face, right? She does not really strike me as someone who would have Moon energy when it comes to her physical appearance, and especially not in the ascendant, because that brings a kind of personality that is kind of really up and down, and also on the surface comes across as pretty wishy-washy in a way, and also very soft, like very, very soft looking. Okay, so like oftentimes with Moon on the ascendant, you will tend to see very round faces, wide faces especially. Of course, unless there are a lot of other influences there that change the situation. Also very, very feminine, especially in a woman's horoscope, all right? And she, again, not saying that she cannot look feminine, she's actually very versatile. That's really, which is very important, and it's a plus in her craft, right? But when it comes to strictly her physical features, she comes across as pretty well defined, like strong bone structure. And one thing that stands out to me, especially, I remember ever since I was a kid, and I grew up in the 90s, so I saw her in a lot of films. I just remember thinking she had a pretty prominent jawline. Like, one of the main things that you see about her, especially as she has gotten older and maybe her facial structure has gotten even more defined, as it does with a lot of people. She has a pretty broad face, I think. I mean, okay, not overall broad, but more towards broad than narrow anyway. But her jawline is very defined, which to me, as an astrologer, screams sun energy. All right. Sun energy tends to show especially a squarish jawline, but a broad jaw either way. Like a jawline that somehow stands out, not very smooth, even in women, all right? And now in her horoscope, she does have her Mars in Kritika Nakshatra, conjunct Rahu in Kritika Nakshatra. And technically, right off the bat, that would be a pretty strong influence that would show, well, maybe not so much with the face, unless the Mars is influencing the face in her horoscope. It wouldn't really explain the broad jaw, but it does explain some of the sun energy that I was picking up. It's not enough, though, to explain the square jaw the way that I see it. So the second option that I would have considered would be something that influences, so it has to be some kind of a direct influence either on the ascendant or the second house and or the moon, okay? Because second house and the moon connect to the face, the facial features, and the ascendant, of course, is the body overall and the head shape. So it includes the face to some extent, but the second house and the moon are more face specific, okay? So like if you want to see clear influences of planets on facial features, you want to look at the moon / the second house, okay? So to me, the sun energy makes a lot of sense when she has ascendant in Virgo, because lo and behold, if you look at the horoscope, you have the sun conjunct Mercury, which is the lord of the first house. So that means that the sun is now directly influencing the overall body appearance. Now, the sun is not just about broad face, broad jawline. It's also about this very sturdy, healthy looking physique, which is really emphasized in her case. Now, I am definitely not calling her fat by any stretch of the imagination. I never thought of her that way, but it always stood out to me from the time that I was very young that she looks like a very healthy looking woman, quote unquote. She has that very sturdy appearance. Even when she was at her slimmest, she did not look small or fragile, which, to be fair, makes perfect sense for Mars in Kritika already right on its own. But putting Mars in Kritika now conjunct the Lord of the Ascendant and the Sun, that would super emphasize this very strong, broad body frame. And a bit of what would be called stout, a bit. She has that typical, shoulder and how should I put it? Like the shoulder and the neck configuration that is typical for Kritika. Like, because Kritika Nakshatra is a nakshatra that is connected to fighting. It's connected to war. And even the women who have, especially Kritika on the ascendant, influencing the ascendant, and to a lesser extent the second house. Well, the second house, like I said, is more about facial features. So mostly on the ascendant, Mars as well, because Mars is the natural ruler of the first house, because Mars is the physical body. So right off the bat, if you look at people who have Mars in Kritika, they generally will look healthy. All right, so you're not really going to see very skinny Mars in Kritikas unless they have Ketu and or Saturn aspecting Mars. All right, and or Mars is very damaged in other ways, right? Already if you have Saturn and Ketu, that means that Mars is a little bit, challenged, okay? But don't want to get sidetracked too much. Either way, right, so the Mars in Kritika now being conjunct the Lord of the Ascendant also means that it is directly influencing. So Kritika is influencing the appearance. On top of that, I actually had And this is the part where I'm definitely a little bit unsure, I will be honest, because initially I had placed her ascendant in Chitra Nakshatra, which is towards the end of Virgo, and I'm still kind of on the fence about whether maybe she's a Chitra or she is an Uttara Falguni, but I eventually decided with Uttara Falguni for a number of reasons. First of all, because Uttara Falguni again is ruled by the sun. So this would bring even more sun energy onto her, physical appearance, her persona, and everything. And not only that, but Uttara Falguni is very artistic. So there are a lot of famous actors and singers who have prominent Uttara Falguni energy. She has that kind of dignified aura that would come with heavy sun influence on the ascendant, on her physical appearance. She has actually played, nobility, or aristocracy, queens, stuff like that, which would be, again, going hand in hand with sun energy. And on top of that, there's also the fact that Mercury, if her ascendant is in Virgo, Mercury is also ruling the 10th house. And then Mercury is conjunct Sun and Mars and Rahu. Okay? So this is even more a supportive of someone who would choose to go for a career in acting, because now Sun is not just influencing the appearance, which explains her physical appearance. And I will be honest, speaking of, sorry that I'm backtracking a little bit, but my first impression actually when I looked at her physique was to think that she has some heavy Mars influence on her physical appearance as well. So there was a moment where I thought, maybe she has Mars in the ascendant. Again, to be fair, that is a possibility, but again, if that were true, her time of birth would have been earlier than, I think, I'm not sure, I would have to check actually. I think it would be earlier than 1 p.m. and that would put her moon in Cancer, which again would not make sense to me. But again, this is why the time of birth issue is complicated. Nobody can be 100% because you have to look at a million different nuances at the same time. However, let me get back to the idea that she has this Mars energy on her appearance. Why? Well, she has the dark hair, the dark eyes that are really intense. She has a strong physique. She has very strong presence. She has a bit of that feistiness that is typical for Mars. And Mars being conjunct the Lord of the Ascendant, again, would more than account for that. Not only that, but last but not least, we have that Rahu influence, okay? So Rahu is the Lord of eccentricity. It is the weirdo archetype, okay? Everything that is unusual, everything that stands out, and especially when Rahu is conjunct the Lord of the Ascendant or influences the Ascendant in any way, tends to bring this physical appearance of a kind of a tendency to have a short distance from the chin to the top of the forehead. So a pretty short face, not short as in like, squashed, but you know what I mean? Like more of a shorter face rather than elongated. Also tends to show wide set and pretty big eyes, usually. All right. So Rahu, if I were to associate it, actually in some ways, like it is kind of like a combination between, I don't know, Saturn and Mercury maybe as archetypes, but again, don't have time to get into this. I did mention, so please comment in the comment section if you're interested in me doing this. I did mention at some point that I've been planning this for a long time to do a series on how different planetary influences shape physical appearance and physical traits, etc., etc. So comment if you want to see that. It will give me a hint that I should start working on it sooner. But yes, there's, again, based on a lot of experience, a lot of horoscopes that I've read, she has an appearance that is very typical for Rahu. So just to give you some other examples, let me think. I think Cindy Crawford. Now, I know you might be thinking, what the hell does Cindy Crawford have in common with Helena Bonham Carter? If you stop to look at their faces, there are some common patterns, the big wide eyes. Also, Rahu tends towards darker complexion, darker features. Mars the same way, whereas Sun is more towards lighter complexion. So this combination of like Mercury Sun, Mars, and Rahu would explain her very contrasting appearance, having very pale skin, but very dark eyes, dark hair. Okay. And also that Kritika energy explains why she would look good with red hair, because Kritika, oftentimes, I've said this in other videos, is really, connected, well, because of the connection to Agni, the god of fire. I think a lot of Kritikas tend to look good as redheads. Some of them are even born redheads, but even when they're not, because obviously redheaded genes are very rare, they tend to look good with red hair. All right. Closing that parenthesis about physical appearance, but also going back to the career aspect. Okay, so then the sun would be conjunct, not only that, but Mars and Kritika. Kritika, again, is a nakshatra that actually tends to produce a lot of very strong actors because, well, again, it's ruled by the sun. It tends to show people who, unlike what corporate is pushing for nowadays, are not really team players. They're not naturally good at working with others unless it's in a very creative sort of environment, such as acting. And also Kritika has this energy of wanting to be center stage, of needing to get attention. Won't get into that whole philosophical, psychological explanation again because I don't want to digress too much. But I have talked about this in other videos. I have actually done some videos about Kritika, so you could just search for the word Kritika and you will see the videos if you want to look into it more in depth. Either way, Kritika influence on the career makes a lot of sense for someone who has obviously a very successful career as an actor. And she was successful from a pretty young age, as far as I remember, really. And it all makes sense, not just because Kritika is there, but because the sun, again, the main agent of self-expression and the main ruler of acting in general, being center stage in any situation, the sun is now conjunct the lord of the 10th house, which is the house of career. And to top everything off, she also has Jupiter in Ardra Nakshatra, which again, I talked about this in other videos, and not my main observation. So it wasn't my original observation. I took this from other astrologers who mentioned that a lot of the times Ardras can make very good actors because they're very, very expressive. So especially with their eyes, they can really act with their eyes and all that. And either way, Jupiter in the 10th house tends to show a person who, again, would want to live a career path that is according to their values, that is according to their, what they believe is important and all that. So generally Jupiter in the 10th, I would not necessarily associate it with acting per se. Oftentimes it can show academia and things like that. But it does show a person who wants to be independent, and it would make sense even in an acting profession because it shows, a person who has to keep studying, who has to keep an open mind and is still given a great degree of freedom, because it's not like having a regular 9-to-5 job. So, and especially in Ardra, like I said, it would make a lot of sense. And also, one thing that I wanted to say, again, I'm jumping back to the appearance thing, but Helena Bonham Carter has had a reputation of being very eccentric from the beginning. She developed this whole thing about having this very eccentric style and, would often show up at red carpet events and all kinds of weird fashion choices over the years. I remember that again from early on, and it still continues. She has like her own unique eccentric style, and together with her husband, they were kind of known as a very eccentric couple. So that's, I guess, part of the reason why a lot of you wanted to see this video. And that would all make sense with Rahu conjunct the lord of her ascendant, again wanting to stand out, to be kind of unique and original, and to explore self-expression in the most unconventional ways possible. There is another important thing to take into account. She actually became infamous at some point in, I think, the 90s because she stole, quote unquote, Emma Thompson's boyfriend at the time, Kenneth Branagh. Very interesting because I just thought about this right now. I mean, and I was thinking about doing a video on Emma Thompson for the members only section, but I'm still thinking about whether I'm going to do that or not. But anyway, Emma Thompson, yeah, so it was this whole thing, it was a scandal, and apparently, I was too young to know or care back then, and either way, whatever, I live in a different country, and I didn't really know, like, the extent of it, but then when I did some research on her and read some stuff, and articles from back in the day, apparently the press really tore her apart. Like, it affected her significantly, and I'm talking about Helena Bonham. Okay, I'm sure that Emma Thompson was also affected, but Helena was affected because the press really attacked her and called her a homewrecker and all the usual yada yada, as usual misogynistic press opinions center around how the woman is stealing a husband, not the fact that the husband, well, in this case they weren't even married. I think they were engaged. I think. But anyway, he was the one who was in a relationship, and the press attacked her and called her all kinds of things, and I think it affected her career to some extent as well, because it made her very unpopular. And again, this makes sense if you look at her natal chart, because the Lord of the 8th house, which is all things taboo, things that technically should stay in the closet, should stay hidden, is conjunct the Lord of the 10th house, meaning Mars is conjunct Mercury. And again, I have talked about this in other videos. This is a combination that oftentimes leads to scandal of massive proportions, and this is because the 10th house is the house of reputation, and the 8th house is the house of, well, taboo things. So, meaning when there's a connection between these two houses through their lords, one of them's lord, one of their lords sitting in the other one, or the lords having an aspect between each other, it shows that scandal oftentimes is going to take public proportions, and it could impact the person's career. Now, I don't really have time to look into this right now. Oh, by the way, if you're curious, please let me know if you would like me to do like a full natal chart analysis for Helena Bonham Carter, because I feel like this is heading that way, but I'm gonna stop soon, I promise. With my calculated, estimated time of birth for her, because yes, I could maybe look into things more in depth, and I don't have time right now. That's what I was gonna say. It would be interesting to look at what dasha she was going through and what transits were active in her horoscope at the time when this scandal blew up, because there might be a connection to her 8th and 10th houses, or the planets that are ruling these houses that would make a lot of sense and would give further confirmation to the time of birth. Either way, just the fact that there is there is this combination between these two houses, in addition to all the other things going on in her horoscope, it all makes sense. Also, not only that, but the Lord of the 12th house, Sun, is also conjunct the Lord of the 10th house, which shows losses, and the 12th house is also the house of bed pleasures and hidden love affairs. Okay, so hidden love affairs being brought to light, affecting her public reputation, potentially her career, makes perfect sense with this combination between the 10th, 12th, and 8th houses, 8th house lords. Oh, and another big one sitting right there in front of me is the Lord of her 7th house is going into the 10th house, okay? She met, and I'm going to get more into this in the Synastry part, she met Tim Burton on the set of Planet of the Apes, and she got pregnant with her first child while filming. That's how they got together, and she has the Lord of the 7th house, the Lord of the spouse, going into the 10th house, which is a very strong indicator of meeting the spouse through career, through work. All right, so I'm gonna stop here. Already you can see there are loads of indicators that to me are enough to consider that this is very likely her time of birth, or at least close to her time of birth. At least, let me put it like this, I think that she has ascended in Virgo, okay? Maybe a different degree, maybe a different nakshatra, but I do think there are strong indicators that she has ascended in Virgo. All right, so this is the end of the Helena Bonham Carter approximation of time of birth, because again, personally, I just find it easier to estimate, to find a time of birth. And oftentimes I do this for clients when they really want to get a reading and they don't know the time of birth. But I have to mention this in case there's anyone there thinking about getting a reading. I need information about the person in question. So that would mean someone sending me a picture or something, because I am very good at reading people based on physical characteristics to see what kind of, astrological configurations might be dominating, etc. Okay, I want to close this right now. And, one more mention. Since I brought up this topic, is I have done approximations without getting pictures and stuff, but obviously accuracy depends on how much information I can get about the person. Okay, now I'm closing it. So, moving on into the actual topic of the video, which is the synastry analysis of Helena Bonham and Tim Burton. Okay, so the first part of the synastry analysis is going to be chart overlays. Those of you who have watched other synastry analyses that I've done for famous couples, you probably already know the general format that I use. So basically, the chart overlays looks at, first and foremost, the inter aspects, which I think are extremely important between her chart and his chart, but in the first step of the overlay, I'm also going to look at his planets on her horoscope. So also get into how his planets are falling into her houses and what this could show for her and how they interact together. And then I'm also going to look at how her planets fall in his houses, okay, and what that means. So I've also, and another mention is, you probably know, again, if you've watched my channel for a while, that I have really gotten into asteroids and other things. Like, I've really looked into them. And by the way, again, I was planning on doing another video. I've collected a lot of information on the asteroid Nessus. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but it's Nessus. I have 2 ideas for 2 videos that I've been meaning to get into for like probably 2 months now, but again, I'm gonna get to it at some point, I promise, when I have time, because I found some very interesting patterns about them. I did not choose to look at that asteroid for this reading because it's not exactly a happy topic. It's kind of dark, but I have activated, Lilith, because I think this is important. Pluto as well. I do take it into account every now and then. Juno is also interesting to look at, but I have not researched it as in depth. Eros, on the other hand, and Psyche. Again, Psyche I have only marginally researched, but Eros and Lilith are extremely important, not just in synastry, but in natal horoscopes. I have found them to be very, very influential in a very specific way, like very specific ways that are not explained through the regular karakas, the regular 7 physical planets that are used in Vedic astrology. So let me get it straight into it. I will also mention that I have not actually looked into their synastry in depth. So I'm gonna, read as I go along. Right off the bat, first thing that stands out to me is that her moon is conjunct his sun, Pluto, and Mercury. So as you can see on the left-hand side, there are some details written, and the red placements are his planets, and the blue placements and the inner circle, that is her chart, right? So we're looking at how his planets influence her chart. So her moon and her Pluto and her Uranus, again, I don't really look at Uranus and Neptune because I think they can be explained through other Vedic placements, but I have included them here nevertheless. So her moon and Pluto are conjunct his sun and his Pluto and his Mercury and apparently his Juno as well. This is really big. So in theory, the Juno asteroid shows marriage. So it's seen as kind of a binding aspect in the sense that it shows a kind of idealized version of a spouse. So the theory is that when one person's Juno is conjunct another person's planets or ascendant, they're very drawn to this person because they feel that this is some kind of ideal spouse archetype that they've always wanted. So if you will, you can kind of look at Juno as the way that Venus is looked at in Vedic astrology as the ideal wife archetype, or you can look at Juno as the Mars/Jupiter archetype from a woman's perspective. All right, this would be like the Vedic astrology equivalents, because Juno is mostly analyzed by tropical, not mostly, entirely, because I never heard Vedic astrologers using asteroids actually. But either way, the fact that Juno is there, I think, adds to the mix. But even if Juno weren't there, we already have Sun, Pluto, Mercury conjunct Moon, Pluto. So very intense connection. A lot of, first of all, masculine, feminine polarity attraction. So this is a very good connection for a straight couple, because the woman's moon conjunct a man's sun means that she naturally feels protected and provided for, and she also naturally kind of falls in a bit of a submissive role. Submissive is not the best word, but more of a receptive, supportive role, right, where she wants to nurture the sun and feels comfortable in that position. And then the sun, usually, again, as a straight man, will feel very comfortable with the moon being supportive and emotionally attentive to him and his needs. And there is this very nice harmonious blending. Obviously, in their case, this is 100% true because they have cooperated a lot. They've worked together a lot. They also haven't had a family. It really seems like they have the full package in terms of what people could hope for from a romantic relationship. All right, so right off the bat, very strong. And then Pluto being thrown in that mix, it just adds more intensity, more of a glue, a binding aspect. Because Pluto brings this element of curiosity, of like constantly wanting to understand the other person and feeling like the other person is this endless well of mystery and layers that you cannot get tired of analyzing and going through. So it would make a lot of sense for a long-term relationship, although the Pluto being there would also potentially hint to power struggles in the relationship. I think, though, because this Pluto, they're Plutos, really. First of all, they're conjunct, which means they see eye to eye in terms of how to do power games and how to establish each other's power. They probably understand each other and don't really see each other as a threat, mainly because of these very supportive aspects of Sun and Moon and the Mercury thrown in, which Mercury brings a lot of understanding, a bit of lightness there, especially if I think if his Mercury hadn't been there in the conjunction, this would have been maybe too intense, too unconscious, like they wouldn't have been able to really make sense of what they're feeling. But the Mercury being there means that they can talk about their feelings, right? They can talk things through. They can look at themselves from a detached perspective and analyze what they're doing, analyze what the other person is doing, right? And so that would really help in the long run in turning this into a very kind of, how should I put it, psychoanalytical sort of relationship, very intellectual, but also kind of a relationship where the two people can really grow together and learn about each other. And by learning about their interactions, they learn about themselves as well. So it looks like there's this like endless growing process happening just by looking at this like little bundle in one side of the horoscope. Okay. Aside from that, another thing that stands out pretty strongly is that he has his Lilith opposite her ascendant. No doubt this would have made him very attractive. Okay. I am not surprised that they started having an affair, right on set, very early on after they met, as far as I understood. And Eros being thrown in the mix would have just made the attraction even more intense. No doubt from both sides. I've mentioned this in another video where, again, I did talk about Eros in Synastry, so I do recommend that. I think I talked about Eros in Synastry, I'm not sure. Or did I just... Oh, I only talked about the archetypes. Yeah. women with Eros dominant energies, but I also talked about the synastry aspect there potentially a little bit. Either way, I did mention this, I do remember it, that when Eros is conjunct a person's point or planet, in this case a point because it's the ascendant, it's not a physical planet, the person feels very attracted. So it's the Eros person that feels mostly extremely attracted to the other person. Not that it can't be mutual, but the Eros person will feel it most intensely and will feel really, stimulated passionately, right? Because Eros, again, going back to the mythology and even, the word erotic love, right, is kind of like a blending of romance with sexuality, right? So it's very exciting and playful and sort of a very positive, kind of like Cupid, Cupid flowing around, liking just the excitement of love, of falling in love and seeing people fall in love. So it's a very it's an area of the horoscope that shows what stimulates you, what makes you feel happy and excited and really, gives you that zest for living, right? But it's not like shallow and it's not purely physical like the Mars energy. Mars, for instance, is just purely sexual. And not only that, but because Mars is connected to war, it has a bit of a conquering energy as well. It's kind of like a mixture between conquering and sexuality, right? Not digressing too much. These are the psychological interpretations of planetary placements. But yes, the Lilith and his Lilith also conjunct her Saturn. Another strong one that is very binding. I've seen this in Synastry. Again, I'm going to link all the related videos in the video description so you can go and watch anything you're interested in, because I have talked about Lilith and Synastry as well, and I'm pretty sure I saw this I definitely saw it with a lot of couples, but I think I saw it with Vivian Lee maybe and Laurence Olivier, or was it Angelina Jolie? I don't remember, but some famous couple that I did, they had, I think, Saturn conjunct Lilith. Either way, I have seen this, Lilith conjunctions a lot, and again, I talked about this more in depth in that video, that they show these very compulsive, passionate attractions, especially the types that don't really make sense sometimes, or they're very eccentric. They're the types, like when these people get together, which hello, for them it makes a lot of sense, right? When these two people get together, it's a lot of people are gonna like frown, or they're gonna raise eyebrows and be like, why are these people together? And in their case it makes a lot of sense because they're from different cultures and they're also both kind of weird in their different way. I actually, as part of my research, came across an article where apparently Helena Bonham herself mentioned that she has ADHD, which was a late life realization, and that she's pretty sure that Tim Burton has some form of neurodivergency. She mentioned Asperger's as well, potentially, because he ticks a lot of boxes. But as far as I read from that article, there was no official testing. But hello, it makes sense because a lot of these mad genius types tend to be neurodivergent. So it makes a lot of sense because they're just this very unconventional couple. And as I mentioned again in that video, you often with Lilith conjunctions will see these combinations where people are from different cultures or there's big age gaps. I mean, in their case, there is a bit of an age gap as well. Let me check. I mean, hello, yes, there's a pretty no, not that big. No, it's considerable. Okay, I wouldn't exactly call it like a huge age gap. It is the kind of age gap that is justified by her Saturn being in the 7th house, by the way. Either way, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, hold on, I'm just gonna check. I was gonna say I think that they were never married, but let me check. Okay, so no, they were never married. And yes, I just remembered another thing while I was looking for information, that speaking of eccentricity, they lived in separate houses while they were together, and they were close connected. So the houses were closely connected so that they could raise their kids together, but they each had their personal space. Makes a lot of sense. What can I say? Yeah. Not just because of the Lilith connections, but also I think them separately, each of them separately, is pretty eccentric. So anyway, moving on. Oh, an even stronger Lilith contact, of course, is the fact that his Lilith is conjunct her Venus. Okay? So again, very strong sign of attraction. Now, technically, as I have mentioned in that video, usually, as far as I have noticed anyway, it is the planet person that tends to become very infatuated with the Lilith person, at least at the onset of the relationship. But it doesn't mean that the Lilith person doesn't feel attracted. It's just that they tend to be more quiet about it, at least early on in the connection. Sometimes there are cases, I've mentioned that in that video where I talked about Lilith and Synastry more in depth. It is the situation that, a person could be the Lilith in a connection, and the planet person, the person who has their planet or their ascendant conjunct the other person's Lilith, becomes obsessed and infatuated and, develops this whole limerence about this person that they may know little to nothing about, while the Lilith person is completely oblivious. All right. Either way, Lilith conjunct Venus, I have talked about this a lot. It showed up in the synastry of Jennifer Lopez and Ben Affleck. And there was another one. There was another famous couple that had, I think, Joe DiMaggio and Marilyn Monroe also had it. I talked about these other, I gave some examples, and I talked a little bit about their interactions and how the aspects played out in that video where I talked about Lilith and Synastry. So I'm going to be linking it in the video description. Either way, whenever you see Lilith, especially conjunct, because this is the most intense aspect, Mars and or Venus, these tend to be very intensely compulsive, crazy, turning your life upside down sort of attractions in romance, right? It's interesting to note that her Saturn is conjunct his Lilith. So I think what could have happened between them was that he had a fear of being controlled by her. Which is typical, because Saturn conjunct Lilith would definitely show this kind of interaction where a person, the Saturn person is going to act like the controlling archetype, because the Saturn person wants stability, they want predictability, because that's what Saturn stands for. Generally, we all have a Saturn, so that shows the area of life where we want things to be predictable, where we're kind of fearful already that things might go wrong. That's where we're pessimistic, etc. And so that area being stimulated by Lilith, which is kind of like the wild child, that doesn't like any kind of impositions on its freedom, can feel uncomfortable. And usually in these interactions, what happens is the Saturn person, being Saturnian, tends to be ever so slightly controlling, and as time progresses, they might tend to become more and more controlling as a way to basically reassure themselves, because they don't like the fact that Lilith may feel them out of their, make them feel like they're out of their comfort zone, and that the Lilith person might disappear. Now, I don't know what actually happened between them. It could have been, who knows, that it turned into some kind of self-fulfilling prophecy between them, where maybe she was afraid to lose him and eventually that happened. But I'm going to see things as they unfold, okay? Then there's another interesting and very powerful aspect to notice, which is that her Juno, all right, and 21 degrees Aries is conjunct his Mars. So clearly there's this mutual idealization that took place between them. Okay, clearly they saw each other as the ideal partners at some point. No doubt probably why they ended up living together for a long time. I mean, having this very serious relationship and also having kids together and working together. Okay. And then there's another very big one. So in this case, his ascendant is known. So this conjunction would happen irrespective of what Helena Bonham Carter's time of birth is, which is his ascendant conjunct her Sun, Mercury, Mars, and Rahu. Okay, so this is a very, very, very strong conjunction. Very strong, and definitely would explain why there was this fated element to this relationship, because her Rahu conjunct his ascendant. I've actually seen the Rahu ascendant again aspect quite a bit. I think again, among famous couples that I've looked at, I'm pretty sure Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt had it. I'm pretty sure. I'm not 100%, but I'm pretty sure. Either way, I have seen it a lot, especially with couples who, again, have very significant long-term, even marriage relationships together, because it makes sense. You know, one person's life path, which is Rahu. So Rahu shows the life path. It's kind of like, think about it this way. Rahu is kind of like the river that you're floating on, right? So from the beginning you're born, it's kind of like you're a river, and the moment of birth is the spring, and then from that moment onwards you are floating down this course of life, and the course of life is driven by Rahu. So Rahu is the pulling force that pulls the water, right? So it's like the direction that you're going to inevitably follow in life, because you are meant to learn the things that Rahu represents, that Rahu stands for in your horoscope. So whenever you come across, especially someone who has their ascendant conjunct your Rahu, it really shows that their path in life and your path in life, they're pretty compatible. So unlike, let's say, a lot of aspects involving Rahu, even the positive ones, like even when you have Jupiter conjunct Rahu, those could tend to go south a lot faster than when Rahu is conjunct the ascendant. Either because they're not as bonding, they're not as strong of a glue, or sometimes because they tend to be more intense, more personal, more emotional, okay, depending on the planet in the situation. But when the ascendant is conjunct Rahu, it just shows compatible life paths, because the ascendant to some extent has to do with your reality. It's your physical body, your personality, and even though it's not exactly the same as Rahu, so it's not the life path, it does show how you go about doing things, right? So your modus operandi to some extent is very much shown by the ascendant. The personality you have cultivated, the way people view you, how you identify, what you identify with, etc. All of those things are shown by the ascendant. So one person's Rahu conjunct all of that shows that it's a very strong, binding, compatible energy. And on top of that, you know, having the sun, having Mercury, again, Mercury being so strong in their synastry, no doubt helped to offset a lot of the more intense energies here, because there's a lot of intensity going on. I mean, all of the Lilith right off the bat shows very intense, wild, passion, all that. And then we also have a lot of Mars, a lot of sun, a lot of heat, really, and a lot of masculine energies as well. Even though they also have the moon, sun, which no doubt help to balance things out. But that Mercury being strongly represented here, and you're going to see it shows up in their composite as well. I did take a peek at the composite. It definitely shows that they are, well, I think they're still friendly, right? Last time I checked. Which makes sense. They would have to be because they have kids together. But I think, you know, you can clearly see that despite whatever attraction may have happened between the two of them, they were always able to probably talk things through and to maintain this kind of lighthearted, friendly sort of attitude towards one another, even when there was a lot of intensity going on at the same time. So that Mercury would have given them enough detachment from their own emotions and from each other's emotions in order to analyze themselves and to analyze their interactions and make logical decisions, at least part of the time. All right. And the Mars ascendant, hello, very strong for physical attraction. Okay, very strong. And then another big one is her Eros conjunct his Venus. Wow. I mean, wow, a lot of intense attraction here. Eros Venus is similar to Venus Mars as a conjunction. So very strong, a lot of passion, a lot of eroticism. Definitely makes sense for a couple, again, that was heavily involved in arts as well. So this would have been the kind of relationship where no doubt the fact that they could cooperate with one another was a great binding force. And I'm sure that whatever passions were going on between them also helped with the creativity aspect of the profession of their professional lives. And then we also have, speaking of creativity, I wanted to check. Let's see. Yeah, this part is pretty interesting in the sense that, well, let me start by saying there is a Saturn Mars aspect. So there is a heavy Saturn aspect. There is his Saturn in Scorpio opposite her Sun, Mercury, Mars, and conjunct Ketu. Wow, this is a very, very, very binding aspect. I think I mentioned this I think I have, I'm not sure, have I? I'm gonna have to look on my own channel because honestly, again, I have about 350 videos. I lost track. I'm starting to get to the point where yeah, I don't know. I'm starting to forget what I talked about. But I definitely did a video on Rahu Saturn in Synastry. I recommend that, and I mentioned how it's one of the most difficult aspects to have in Synastry. But the Ketu Saturn, this is very binding. This will create the kind of relationships that are never really over. It's like, which kind of makes sense why I think I actually, even when I came across articles, you know, when I was doing some research, I came across a lot of articles that say that in the eyes of the world, to a large extent, Helena Bonham Carter and Tim Burton are still together. They're like, even though they were never married, people are like, they're a couple. They're an item. I think, okay, it is because they just seem like they're so good together in the eyes of many people. And it will be interesting to look more into the composite as well. But Saturn conjunct Ketu, again, in my experience, creates these incredibly binding relationships, irrespective of the type of the relationship, okay? Because obviously this is a romance here, but it could be a friendship. It could be a connection with, I don't know, some coworker you met one time and you just can never really let them go or something. You keep thinking about them or you keep bumping into them or, you know. So Ketu with Saturn shows that technically, according to theory, in a past life, right, one of you was the other person's servant, let's say, or maybe you had some kind of a heavy binding connection, you know, because Saturn tends to show servants, you know, servitude, tends to connect to, I guess, again, trying not to offend anyone. These are not my words. These are traditional Vedic perspectives that Saturn rules beggars, that it rules the underprivileged in society. This is why Saturn oftentimes shows hardships, poverty, lack of material wealth. Okay, this is why it's called the Great Malefic, but it doesn't mean that it's all bad. We need both, you know, we need both Saturn and Jupiter, just like we need night and day. We need a balance, right? And it does bring positive things because without hardship, you can't appreciate shit, right? So, I mean, look at the rich people of the world. Do you think they wake up and they appreciate the fact that they live in a palace every day? Anyway, let me not digress. P.S. I'm not a communist. But Saturn conjunct Ketu, okay, tends to show that either you and this person were heavily connected to some kind of heavy responsibilities. Like, I don't know, one of you was the servant of the other person. One of you was the superior of the other person. You were bound through a contract to the other person. Or it could have been like a professional connection, just purely professional. You worked together in the same company. You were both slaves in the same, I don't know, Egyptian pharaohs army or something. Whatever the thing was, right? The Saturn is this very heavy glue. Like, this is super glue. This is the thickest. Saturn is the thickest glue. And conjunct Ketu, it shows many lifetimes, potentially even more than one lifetime, okay? Because, like, when I talk about lifetimes, it could have been more than one. And it shows that you have a strong history binding you together with this person. Now, the positive side of the Ketu Saturn is that even if there are hardships, which Oftentimes there are, because that's the difference. And again, I talked about this very in depth in the videos where I talked about how to read Rahu Ketu conjunct different planets, okay? And the general theory is Rahu magnifies, Ketu diminishes. And the longer the two people are together, the more Rahu magnifies, the more Ketu diminishes. So the general theory is that, for instance, when it comes to malefic planets, it's good to have Ketu conjunct the malefics, because that means that the longer the two people are together, the less malefic influence there will be in that relationship, right? So Saturn shows limitations. It shows material limitations. So for instance, couples who get together and they just cannot make it work because, again, and if you want to see those kinds of couples, you can look at the video that I did about Rahu conjunct Saturn, because that's exactly what happens with these couples. The longer they are together, the more hardships they face, until eventually the pressure becomes so great that one of them cracks under the pressure. It's not that, and oftentimes it's not that they don't love each other, but it's so much stuff can happen that it just keeps taxing the relationship. It's kind of like, imagine two people are, I don't know, like they want to enjoy a nice vacation, but they're surrounded by a warring army trying to break down the walls around the beach or something, right? And the louder the noise gets, the more bombs are thrown, whatever, the more difficult it is for them to enjoy the situation. I'm sorry to make light of this because I know that there are wars going on in the world, but this was the imagery that I could come up with, probably because of the news. And this is the general message, that Rahu magnifies problems. So when Rahu is conjunct Saturn, problems keep happening, and they're circumstantial problems. Like one of them starts to get sick, one of them has to get a job where they are away from home 6 months out of the year. They get together and suddenly, I don't know, their stocks fall to the ground and now they're struggling to pay the bills. They struggle with, one of them cannot conceive. Once they have kids, the kids may have health issues, etc., 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 etc. So with Rahu conjunct Saturn, the more they are together, the higher the obstacles. With Ketu conjunct Saturn, the obstacles will be greater at the beginning of the relationship. There will be great tests at the beginning of the relationship. And then as time progresses, they get less and less and less and less, okay? So this shows, for instance, I don't know, when these two people get together, just like in their case, maybe they lived on different sides of the world. I don't know where Tim Burton lived. Was he already living in London? I don't know exactly. But they lived in different parts of the world. Maybe there were cultural differences, maybe religious differences, whatever. So there are differences, okay? At the onset of the relationship, there are all kinds of obstacles, but as time progresses, they tend to get more and more comfortable with each other, and they tend to learn how to work through their problems, and their problems become less and less, okay? Now, it doesn't mean that these relationships always last a lifetime, just like in this situation. Although, again, in the eyes of the world, they're still together and nobody can accept anything different. But aside from that, I think, like I said, these are the kinds of connections that never fully end, which sucks for, I guess, their current partners. But yeah, they don't fully end, and it doesn't mean, of course, that the relationship cannot just stay amicable and platonic, but once it is formed, it is pretty much unbreakable. They can choose to. This is what I wanted to say. I would not be surprised. I would not be surprised if at some point they would get back together, because I've seen this a lot with Saturn Ketu, where they, couples will go through phases where they'll have a fallout, because again, a lot of other stuff could be happening in the synastry, of course, as usual. They could have a fallout. They'll have moments, where they don't talk to each other for years, and then all of a sudden they'll bump into each other and they'll get back together, because it's a very strong glue, and there's this very strong not familiarity. So, like, to put it in, let's say, very down to earth layman's terms, Saturn conjunct Ketu creates this feeling of you can always count on this person. You can always fall back on this person, okay? So that's why, in my opinion, it is an extremely strong glue. I cannot. As I was talking about this aspect of like getting back together, suddenly I had the idea to check Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor's Synastry. I think didn't I mention them as an option? Because I don't remember doing their Synastry. I don't think I did. I did a video about Elizabeth Taylor, her astro profile, where I went over her main relationships, but yeah, so again, if you're interested in seeing the Synastry of Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor, please let me know in the comment section. It was part of the poll that I had on my community post. You can also find that poll and maybe, well, no, don't vote anymore because I'm going to start a new one maybe when I'm going to do another relationship analysis. But if you're curious to see this, please comment in the comment section because I have just checked their Synastry and lo and behold, they have the Saturn Ketu conjunction. Her Saturn in Capricorn conjunct his Ketu in Capricorn. And yeah, they were married. Weren't they married twice? I'm not sure if they were married twice or they married. I think they were married twice and they were engaged one time. And either that or they were married. They were definitely married at least once and engaged. I remember they were engaged at the last time they were together and they broke it off. Either way, in the eyes of the world, again, I mean, when you say Elizabeth Taylor, you think Richard Burton. And when you say Richard Burton, you think Elizabeth Taylor. Even though Elizabeth Taylor was married to, what, like 5 or 6 different guys? Most people, when, if they were to choose what major love of her life, who was the major love of her life, they would probably say, Richard Burton, because he was the one that was... Again, they stuck to each other like glue. What can I say? Okay, closing the parenthesis, but y'all, can I just, I love it. I love how astrology is more accurate than anything, really. It's just, even though I've been into it for more than 20 years now, more than 25 if I'm honest, I don't want to keep adding because I don't want you to know that I'm older than the Bible, but it's just fascinating. It's like the more you get into it, the more it's just unbeatable. There's just nothing like it. Nothing. Anyway, nothing in terms of the information that you can get. There's no conventional form of information or knowledge or science that can give you the insights that astrology gives you. Okay, I've just ended my speech. Brothers and sisters, I feel like I'm a preacher or something. Going back to Richard Burton and Helena Bonham Carter. Heavy Saturn, but the Saturn influences, again, I'm gonna keep referencing so aspects that I talked about in previous videos. Rahu conjunct, not Rahu, sorry, Saturn opposite Mars. It is a difficult aspect. Now, I have also done videos where I talked about how some aspects can be unbearably difficult. And again, I have some ideas for other videos that I'm going to do as kind of updates. I still stand by the general theories that I described in other videos, especially the one where I talked about aspects that could be deal breakers. Now, I mentioned deal breakers because they are aspects that bring a lot of challenges, but that doesn't mean that they are insurmountable, really. And this is why I want to do an update on the general philosophy of Synastry and how you should look at it at some point. Because technically all aspects can be worked through. It's just that it depends on the person and it depends on what their priorities are, right? So like, for instance, a Saturn-Mars aspect can be very frustrating because, if each person is very independent, they want to do their own thing, they're not willing to compromise, then yes, it's going to be unbearable because this is an aspect that requires taking some pauses, taking some time to look at yourself, to analyze now. And I do think that this is probably why they had a very long-lasting relationship because, again, they had that Mercury energy going on, which no doubt helped them in, balancing and going through the, back and forth of feeling on the one hand that they are balancing each other out, but also sometimes dealing with a lot of challenges. Because Saturn would show that, again, he would have had a kind of constricting force on her, basically. So that she sometimes felt that he was raining on her parade, that he was, again, not necessarily that he was actively controlling, like, you know, checking her phone. This is an interaction between Mars and Saturn where even if a person is sitting there just breathing and they're the Saturn, the Mars person is going to feel oppressed, you know, like they're going to suddenly feel way more self-conscious around the Saturn person because they're going to feel this like cold breeze of judgment being flown into their direction, especially in her case, also being opposite the Sun and Mercury. It would have been very influential in terms of, on the one hand, yes, maybe restricting her, but on the other hand, also grounding her in some ways. And it's also fascinating to take into account the fact that, again, if my assessment of her time of birth is correct, and she is indeed a Virgo rising, that means that his Saturn is also opposite the Lord of her 10th house, and he was no doubt a very strong influence on her career, okay? I think mostly for the positive. And vice versa, okay? Because, yeah. It's also really cool to notice, now I just noticed it now, that both of them have Saturn in the 7th house. So this basically shows both of them want and need partners that are mature. And also for both of them, it shows Saturn tends to show an age gap of roughly 7 years, roughly. And it's really interesting because in their case, it's actually roughly 7 years, okay? It's actually to the mark almost. Usually when I see Saturn in the 7th house, I say the partner will be at least 7 years, all right? Or like, you know, minimum around the 7-year mark, there will be an age gap between the partners. I actually just, as I was looking into, again, information about them, came across something that said that Helena Bonham is now dating a guy who's 21 years younger than her. So yeah, definitely continuing the Saturn in the 7th house pattern. I don't know about him. Apparently he was dating Monica Bellucci. So he's more age appropriate. Impressive. Yeah, I don't know. Or he was, I don't know. But either way, going back to their interaction, the Saturn thing could have been a bittersweet situation. Now, if she is, which I think she is, because based on the way she presents herself, based on her basic persona and what has been out about her in the press, and just, you know, based on her horoscope and her vibe, I think she's a person who really likes freedom. Okay, so if he was that very grounding Saturnian restrictive energy, it could have been that she got to a point where she had enough. I think, again, it's really cool because they probably reached that point where they were really on the brink of, or how should I put it, right at the border between not standing each other and on the other hand not being able to live without the other person, which makes sense with respect to their choice of having separate houses, because they probably both are very being creative, right, and being very independent. They're both probably very focused on doing their own thing, achieving their own projects, having, yeah, whatever, maybe having different moods, different whatever, and being very independent, probably just not wanting to be in each other's space all the time. But I also wonder if a lot of these Saturn influences, right, especially the Lilith Saturn that she has, so I feel like there's a mutual fear of control here from both of their sides, right? From her side, it's his Saturn opposite that cluster of her planets, the Sun, Mercury, Mars, and Rahu, and from his side, her Saturn conjunct his Lilith is the strongest one that I see, right? Yeah, so I think there was, like, you know, it makes sense. The choice of the two houses makes a lot of sense with these. I think they mutually triggered each other's fear of being controlled. This is what I'm seeing, right? It's also even more so, I think, the case because he also has, let me just check, actually. Yeah, he also has ascendant in Kritika. So Kritika, again, Kritika and all the sun dominant nakshatras, they in general struggle more than average with relationships because they're extremely independent. So the sun is a very self-standing energy. It's very self-motivated. And, generally these are people that have a very hard time, probably the hardest time with compromising because they're like, I'm here to do what I want and nobody else is going to tell me what to do, etc. So it makes a lot of sense, both of them being creative and all that. And also the decision to not be married, again, I think speaks of potential fears of being tied down, in addition to maybe financial concerns, because both of them were established by the time that they got together. Probably Tim Burton even more so. But anyway, it kind of paints this picture of them being eccentric, friendly, and kind of like, here's the thing, I always get this feeling from them as a couple, like, not that I watch them intensely, but whenever I would see them, pictures of them, or like, them being filmed on red carpet events and stuff, there's this vibe of like, they're on each other's side, but at the same time, they're really intent on being their own people. Yeah. So like probably having a hard time balancing their need for independence versus their need for relationships. This is all I have to say. Probably spent too much time being roundabout about it. But let me move on to other things that I see. Well, I already talked about the Venus, the Eros. One thing that I wanted to look at was the whole Darakarka, Atmakarka situation. Again, did a video about this. I'm going to link it in the video description if I don't forget. If I do forget, it's a video that I did, which is my original concept. I have not seen this analyzed anywhere, but it's a pattern that I noticed by empirical research, by looking at hundreds, maybe thousands of horoscopes by now, where I've seen this pattern where if a pattern that shows basically longevity in relationships is that it's very important for one person's Darakaraka to have common energies with the other person's Atmakaraka. I did a video that I'm still pretty proud of, I have to say. Not in terms of like visual anything, because obviously I don't actually film anything, but I'm very proud of the information I gathered and the research I did. I looked at a lot of horoscopes, well, a bit, but I looked very in depth into some famous couples, and I went through mathematical calculations, downright mathematical calculations, where I added points and stuff. And so anyway, I recommend watching that video. But looking at their horoscopes, so her Atmakarka, so the planet with the highest degree, is the sun. Makes a lot of sense, right? Her sun is her Atmakarka. Let me just double check. Do I see anything else? Uranus is really throwing me off course here. So the Atmakarka can only be one of the first 7 planets: Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, or Saturn. Karaka basically means planet. Okay, so physical planet. So the Atmakarka is the planet with the highest degree in a person's horoscope. I have talked about this again. I have entire playlists where I talk about it. I don't know if I've mentioned too much about Atmakarka, but definitely with Darakarka, I did loads of videos because that's the one that speaks of the spouse archetype. So Atmakarka is the soul's purpose in this lifetime, right? What you are meant to develop, what your path is. Again, together with the North Node and some other placements in the Vedic astrology, they basically shape your personal North Node, all right? Your personal North Star. That's what I was going for. So the thing you are born flowing towards, that guides you, that, keeps you functioning, that makes you want to get out of bed in the morning for. And people with Sun as Atmakarka, this would make perfect sense for an actress because the Sun is about self-expression. It actually rules drama, right? Sun is the ruler of Leo. It's the only sign that it rules. Corresponds to the 5th house, the heart chakra. It's passion. It's, desire. It's wanting to create things out of nothing. Self-expression. It connects to drama more than any other planet, like I said. So it makes perfect sense that she chose to become an actress. And also her sun is in Rohini Nakshatra, which is a very creative nakshatra as well. And also, like, again, I mentioned conjunct Mars in Kritika, which is also very good at being creative and very, very focused on getting attention and is naturally good at drama. I mean, naturally good as in they just tend to attract attention. And also, Kritika tends to have very strong presence. Like, a lot of times, especially if you look at women actresses with prominent Kritika, they're usually the types that, steal the show. Even when they're not particularly good looking, they're just impossible to ignore because they have a very strong presence, that sun thing of like, here I am, the queen is here, etc. Everybody stop and look at me. So that's like sun energy. So she has the sun as Atmakaraka, which again, I talked about this, I'm pretty sure, in some videos, to some extent, but I'm going to link everything. I talked about this in the video that I did ages ago about what astrology taught me about gender. I went into how social expectations can basically ruin relationships. Because I mentioned there that, for instance, if you're a woman with sun as Atmakaraka, like Helena here, you're going to have a harder time than a man. Because your life trajectory is going to be about developing sun qualities, which in the eyes of misogynistic society means that you are trying to be a man, right? But you need to understand that from an astrological perspective, there's no such thing as man and woman. These are energies, okay? So like if you think of it from a higher plane, not from the physical area of social expectations and customs and traditions and all these little things that humans use to function and the way that they made sense of the world. But if you look at it from a higher perspective, from the perspective that Vedic astrology comes from, which is energies that are governing, patterns of energies that are governing the world, masculine simply means proactive. It means outward focused, okay? It also means self-motivated. Basically, when you think of masculine, you think of impervious, right? Something that is already well-shaped, doesn't need any modifications, okay? Now, I realize with every word that I'm saying that anything can be attacked because in today's world, everybody's like, what are you saying? Like what? That women are molded? That's not what I'm not trying to say that women are whatever, but this is the misogynistic view. Now, feminine, think about it this way, okay? Let me put it in a different way. Think of water. Why is water, even in astrology, associated to feminine energy? Because water is malleable, okay? Water takes the shape of the thing that it falls into. It's adaptable. It's compromising. It can be permeated, right? Now compare water to a diamond. Compare water to metal, right? Compare water to fire on the other hand. Well, in a way, fire can also be permeated, kind of works around, but fire is also indestructible. Like it destroys through things. It doesn't easily allow things to destroy it in a way. And it's not even about destruction or not destruction. It's about this idea of, can you be shaped or not? Are you open to things or not? So the more masculine energy exists in a person's horoscope, the more self-motivated. This is a creative sort of person that already knows what they want to bring into the world. And if you look at it from the perspective of social expectations, women are just not really easily accepted in these roles. Not even nowadays, really. I mean, just look at famous women that have existed throughout history, really. I mean, think of your Marie Curie's, your Elizabeth I, your all these women who, had an idea of what they wanted to do. What was her name? Florence Nightingale, right? Who was basically the founder of the modern day hospital system. And if you read about her life, she had to deal with a lot of obstacles, a lot of misogyny, a lot of crap in her path because men would not even listen to her opinions just because she was a woman, right? And this is and by the way, Florence Nightingale happened to have, I think, Moon in Kritika, if I'm not mistaken. So some heavy sun going on in her horoscope as well. So the bottom line is that Sun or Mars energies, which are seen as traditionally masculine in the eyes of society, tend to create problems for women, even when they do find a man who is compatible to them astrologically. So a man who will be willing to play the more supportive role because of the pressures that it puts on the man, right? So if you look at it from a social perspective, a guy could be in a relationship with a woman and she's the leader of the relationship, but the neighbors will make fun of him, or his friends will call him controlled and that he is, not a real man. And then there's also, on top of the social pressures, there's also the biological aspect, which I talked about in that video as well, which is that a woman may have Sun as Atmakarka, but she still has, from an animal perspective, the biology of a woman. So she's still the one who's physically smaller and weaker and needs protection. So even from her perspective, it's just from the perspective of inner sides of herself, there will be an inner conflict happening where on the one hand she wants to be free to do whatever she wants, but on the other hand her biology is telling her that she needs, a partner who's a protector and provider. So that makes things way more frustrating and way more complicated for people who have these Atmakarkas in positions that make them difficult to accept by society, basically. So you could see similar things, for instance, with a man who has Moon as Atmakarka. People will be like, oh, he's too soft, he's too malleable, he's too whatever. Because the Moon is about learning how to be compromising, how to be gentle, how to be indirect, maybe be creative, etc. So yeah, society will put all kinds of pressures. But anyway, I digressed way too much. Just to illustrate what I'm talking about. So she has Sun as Atmakarka. He has, let me see. Yes. Mercury, I think, as Darakarka. Yes, Mercury. So Mercury is the planet with the lowest degree in his horoscope. Now in her horoscope, the planet with the lowest degree is the Moon. Ding, ding, ding. Which makes sense. So she would want a partner who has Moon qualities. Now, this is the baseline. Okay, so she has Moon as Darakarka. He has Mercury as Darakarka. Now, if you look at his horoscope, where is his Mercury? His Mercury is conjunct the Sun and Pluto, already a sign of great compatibility, because it's not just that he wants a partner who is mercurial, but he wants a partner who also carries Sun energy. So that matches her Atmakarka. That's a very supportive combination, okay, for her. Having a partner who, so his needs from a partner, because that's what the Darakarka shows. The Darakarka shows what you need from a partner, all right? His needs are not threatened by her life path. Quite the contrary, his needs and her life path are complementary. So she is about developing her Sun qualities. Not only that, but her Sun is conjunct Mercury, conjunct Mars, conjunct Rahu. So very strong compatibility here, if you look at it from this perspective, because her Sun is now also embodying the energy of Mercury, which is his main Darakarka. Again, I talked about this more in depth in that video where I talked about, if in case I forget to list it in the description, or YouTube gives me an error because my description is too long, because that has happened. You can look for it on my channel under the title of Atmakarka. Well, again, keywords, okay? Just look for keywords. Something like Atmakarka, Darakarka, a hidden gem of Synastry, or Atmakarka and Darakarka and Synastry, something like that. Okay, and you're going to find it. So I went over how basically you have to look for the same energies that are surrounding that Darakarka. So the main influence is the planet itself. So which planet is the Darakarka, which planet is the Atmakarka. Second influence, which is almost the same as having that planet as Darakarka or Atmakarka, is conjunctions. Okay, conjunctions to that planet. So in other words, if a person, like in this case, right, like Tim over here has Mercury as Darakarka, having Sun conjunct Mercury is almost the same as having Sun as Darakarka. And so if you compare to her Sun as Atmakarka, that's very compatible. And now the fact that she has Sun as Atmakarka conjunct Mercury is almost the same as having Mercury as Atmakarka as well, because those two planets are overlapping. When a conjunction happens, It means they're kind of like Siamese twins. The two planets cannot make a move without the other one feeling it. And so both of those energies are mixed together. So from his perspective and her Atmakarka, so from his dark arca to her Atmakarka, there's good compatibility. Very good. Okay. Now there's also some extra energy there that she has because her Mars and Rahu, yes, are conjunct her Sun, which is something he doesn't have as far as I see. Hold on, let me check. Where is his Rahu? It's in Libra, yeah, so that's not an influence on the Sun. And Mars is, let me see, 1, 2, yeah, Mars is not aspecting either. So she has like these two other energies, and she also has some Venus because her Sun is in Taurus, right? The whole cluster is in Taurus. So there's some Venus energy. And then you can also get down all the way to the level of nakshatras as well. So if you also add the nakshatras, her Sun is in Rohini, that's moon energy. And let's see, his Sun is 9 degrees Leo, that is Magha, so that's Ketu energy. Yeah. It doesn't really go beyond the fact that they have Sun and Mercury as far as I see as mutual energies, but already that's very strong. If you look at the video that I did where I looked over a lot of famous couples, this combination is rare to find, okay? And now if you look at it from her, sorry, did I say that she has Moon as Darakaraka? No, I made a mistake. Thankfully, I didn't get to analyze her. I was just about to start now. She has Venus. So she has Venus as Darakaraka because I missed the fact that Venus is at 0 degrees. Okay. So she has Venus as, either way, this is another thing as a parenthesis that I noticed a lot is that when a woman, not just a woman, right? That whenever the Atmakarka is a masculine planet, the Darakarka tends to be a feminine or vice versa, which makes a lot of sense when you think about it. I wonder if it happens all the time. Either you see this, or at the very least, you will see a feminine planet being the Atmakarka or a masculine planet being the Atmakarka, and then the Darakarka is a neutral planet, what I would call neutral, which would be Saturn or Mercury. These are sometimes called as eunuch planets, lol, because they're not powerfully feminine or masculine. This is why, according to some astrologers, they're even connected to homosexuality. But again, this would be something I would have to look into more in depth. Because, the idea being that Mercury is that age that is like right before puberty where you're, Mercury is the child, right? It's kind of like, it's not exactly child, but it's kind of right before puberty, right? You're still a kid, basically. So you don't really have a strong gender definition because if you look at children, they're all kind of, they don't really care about gender. If society wouldn't tell them what gender they were, they wouldn't give a shit. But because they don't have hormones, their hormones are not fully developed, right? So they don't care. But on the other hand, if you look at Saturn, it's the old person, right? It's like the old woman, old man, where again, if you look at really old people, isn't it kind of even a running joke among most countries, as far as I've seen, that it's like you will hear comments like, oh, they're so old, you don't even know what gender they were. Like, because once people get to an age where they're very old, they it's kind of like gender doesn't even matter because gender is something that's relevant for reproduction when you think about it, right? So you have to kind of be at that age where you're at a reproductive age to even care about gender on an instinctive level. So it makes sense. Astrology has a logic. It has a logic that a lot of people don't think about because they just don't stop from the rat race to ever look around and understand their whereabouts, not because it's not a real logic or it doesn't point to a universal truth. But anyway, let me not digress. Enough of today's sermon on the importance of astrology. But yes, the bottom line is that this is an observation that I've seen, is that, which makes sense when you think about it, because if a person has masculine Atmakarka, it would be very difficult to make a relationship work at all with someone who also has, masculine energy. Right, so it's just you rarely see it, is all I'm going to say. But her Venus as Darakarka in Aries, this is Ashwini Nakshatra. It's very interesting because a lot of, again, more Ketu energy. This woman makes a lot of sense. And again, by the way, I do recommend the video that I did on archetypes of Ketu, where I actually mentioned Tim Burton. I don't know if I mentioned Helena Bonham Carter. Maybe I should have, because obviously she was his muse for some time. But yes, Tim Burton with his aesthetic and everything, very Ketuvian. And Ketu, yeah, so Ketu shows up prominent in her horoscope, which makes sense with respect to her being unusual, a bit of a loner, and this is also based on stuff that I read about her life. Like, she did not have an easy life or childhood. As far as I understood, her mother was sick a lot, or absent, or something like that, or she passed away young. Anyway, or was it her father? I don't remember. Again, if you are interested in seeing her analysis for her entire life, please let me know in the comment section. I will do like an astro portrait at some point. But yes, the just as a side note, the Venus in Ashwini, Marilyn Monroe had it. A lot of famous, again, as far as I've seen, famous creative people have Venus in Ashwini, and Ashwini placements in general. It's a very creative energy, but especially Venus in Ashwini shows this very a person who's very passionately individualistic and independent. They're doing their own thing, you know. And Ashwini is, again, reminds me of an idea that I had for another video, where I wanted to talk about the genius of Ketu, which is precisely this fact that they're very, very original. It stems from that, because they're not afraid to do their own thing, especially in Ashwini, because this is the pioneer sign. It is literally the first nakshatra. It's the first nakshatra, and well, it's first because it starts in Aries. Okay, it's very much connected to this very pioneering, want to do whatever I want sort of thing. So it shows very independent, almost visionary sort of energy a lot of the times. And yeah, her Venus in Aries conjunct his Mars in Aries, which, if I'm not mistaken, is in Kritika. Hold on. No, it's not in Kritika. It's in Bharani. Okay, it's in Bharani Nakshatra. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense for their energies. And let's not also forget Venus conjunct Mars. This is very, very passionate. Again, very romantic in and of itself, right? It's one of the strongest aspects. Again, did a separate video just on Mars conjunct Venus. You can check it out. And especially when it's interesting that and I think this was another binding force for them, the fact that at least when it comes to these classic aspects, they have both of these classical, very strongly binding romantic aspects, which is her moon, his sun, her Venus, his Mars, right? So very, very attractive aspects to have, right, between a straight couple, especially for biological reasons as well. Typical gender roles were at least partially respected, let's say. And yeah, but I was starting to say, because yeah, her Venus is in Aries. Let me see, is there any other aspect? I'm not seeing any strong aspects on her Venus, to be honest. Saturn is not aspecting. Let's see, no Rahu, no Ketu. Moon is trining, if you want to take the trine into account, which is a tropical perspective. I do personally take the trines into account with some, even from the Vedic perspective, trines are sometimes taken into account. They're just not called like that. But yeah, there's a slight, energy, let's say, of the moon maybe on her Venus. And then Venus in Ashwini shows Ketu energy. So these are the main energies on her Darakarka, which again is the aspect that shows the placement, or the point that shows what a person needs in a romantic relationship the most, and what they need from a romantic partner. Okay. I think I talked about this in another video. If I did, I definitely meant to, because I think I did. I talked about it a little bit in the series that I did, because I did a series where I went through each planet as dark arca and what they mean. So again, do recommend that. It's an entire playlist. So you can find Venus as dark arca. I mentioned this again just based on empirical observation and, you know, knowledge of psychology and whatnot, things that I put together over the years, that, and I still stand by it, I've never seen this contradicted, that the dark arca basically shows aspects of ourselves that we disown. Okay? And this is the part where, again, astrology really connects to psychology, because oftentimes, according to psychology, we are attracted to people that represent parts of ourselves that we disown. And yeah, it checks out from an astrological perspective as well. Because according to the ancients, right, so from Vedic astrology, which developed thousands of years back, now I don't know how far back the concept of Darakarka goes, but it's definitely not from our generation, so I would say at least 100 years or more. Even in the old days, you know, when people didn't know anything about psychology, they knew from the astrological perspective that, hey, look, people are drawn to people that show that, you know, are described by their dark arca placements in their horoscopes. And yeah, it checks out it checks out psychologically nowadays, because the dark arca shows parts of ourselves that we disown, because it is the planet with the lowest degree. And so planets with the lowest degree are the least developed, right? So they're like newbies in a sign. Imagine, like, especially when you have 0 degrees, right? And oftentimes people with their dark arcas, I personally rarely, if ever, have seen a dark arca that has over 20 degrees. Because that would mean that the person's entire horoscope, like their entire 7 karakas from Sun to Saturn, are over 20 degrees. So you rarely, if ever, are going to see that. Usually the dark arca is maybe just over 10 degrees of a sign. Maybe. I've seen that, okay? But a lot of the times it's under 10 degrees. And so the lower the degree, the more inexperienced the planet is about that sign, the more unsure it is. It's like, you know, let's say Venus here in 0 degrees Aries versus Venus in, let's say, 25 degrees Aries would be like the difference between someone who has just graduated law school and now is in the first 3 months of their first job as a lawyer, and someone who has worked as a lawyer for 30 years, maybe in multiple countries, right? And after a lot of studies or... Right, so the difference being that if a planet is in the first degrees, they're still inexperienced. They don't really know the ropes about how to handle the energy of that planet. So this is why these are areas where we tend to feel uncomfortable, and we tend to kind of, you know, we also tend to be unconscious of them or even repress them subconsciously, right? Because we're not comfortable with them. We don't really know how to handle that side of ourselves. So we tend to project it onto other people. And yeah, in her case... not just in her case, I don't know if I mentioned this, but it's something that I have definitely picked up by analyzing a lot of horoscopes, that women with Venus as dark arca, they always go for men who give them a lot of pleasure. Because Venus as dark arca shows that the main thing you want from a person, oftentimes these are also women who check the financial aspect of a man. So they could be drawn to power and status and all that. Sometimes they are women who, well, sometimes it could be a mixture of both things, or it could be one or the other. Oh my god, I just realized that this is really funny in Helena Bonham Carter's case, because I happen to look for who she's dating right now, and this guy is not just 21 years younger, but he's also very good looking. I would say, personally. So this is something that is very easily explained through her Venus as dark arca. Because, as I was about to say, they either go for men who are good looking, or they're men who are wealthy. Ideally, they go for both, okay? Why? Because Venus is about hedonism. It's about pleasure. To some extent, this could be mitigated if Venus were aspected heavily by Ketu. I think in her case, to some extent, it does fall in that category, because even though Venus is not aspected by Ketu, it is falling in a Ketu-dominated sign, which is Ashwini. or Saturn. Saturn would, tone down this desire for luxury, for pleasure and all that, and make a woman more, let's say, modest in her expectations and also more desiring of stability. But generally with Venus, right, you are projecting the Venus energy onto someone else. You want someone else to bring you the wealth, the beauty, the pleasure, the sensuality, the hedonism, right? And I have to say, with these women, usually, the sensuous part of a relationship is very important for them. They're almost kind of looking for men who are like a muse in some way, who is the inspiration, the Venus. And I swear to God, you're gonna laugh when I say this, but I used to, be pretty close to a woman who has Venus I was just thinking, she's past the age of 60, but she's around. Has Venus is Dark Arca, and she would randomly brag about how handsome her husband was in his youth. Like, just throw it in a conversation. He was the hottest thing in high school. All the chicks were all over him. That's Venus. That is Venus for you. All right. And another thing that I mentioned about women with Venus as Dark Arca is they tend to be very insecure about their attractiveness, because Venus in a woman's horoscope represents your power of attraction, power of seduction, your ability and also confidence of using your feminine wiles, right? And when this Venus is, let's say, in this, kind of baby cocoon stage where you're not really aware of it, it tends to show these women who never see themselves as attractive. And it's really funny because even if you look at women just like her, to be fair, I mean, I always thought she was really beautiful. Maybe she's not the most, I guess, conventionally smexy sort of actress, but she is definitely above average good looking. I mean, hello. And it's funny because as I started working on this topic, I realized that probably the role that I liked or remembered her the most in was the role of Morgan Le Fay in Merlin, the Hallmark production of Merlin with Sam Neill. May he rest in peace, because he recently passed away. And she played this girl who was, slightly disfigured and was very obsessed with being beautiful, and basically decides to agree to being the subject of a spell by an evil witch. Maybe some of you have watched that film, because I do recommend it, even though by today's standards it would be very vanilla. I really liked it. But yeah, she agrees to basically be put under a spell just to become beautiful so she can impress the man that she loves or something, or find love or something. And I really remember the line in the movie where Merlin, confronts her about why she, quote, sold herself to the dark forces and joined with the evil witch Mab. And, she says something like, why should I not be friends with them? Look, they gave me a son because they allowed her to get pregnant or something and made me beautiful. And Merlin said, it's only an illusion. And then she said, beauty is always only an illusion. And I remember, like, it's really weird because I haven't seen that film in, I don't know, at least 15 years. It's not like, maybe I saw it once or twice or 3 times, I don't know. But there were some scenes in it that really stuck with me, and that was one of them. And I thought, it's, now that I looked at her Venus situation, I thought, maybe she was very convincing in that role, because maybe she actually felt like it. Maybe she felt like the ugly duckling or something. And even parts of interviews that I came across of hers from, ages past show that she was basically very, well, not very, but she did say things like, I wanted to become someone else. I wanted to reinvent myself, stuff like that. The kind of things that you would expect from someone who was not very happy about herself, very, very happy, content, and comfortable in her own skin. And yeah, Oftentimes, and I've said this in another video as well, even Angelina Jolie, if I am not mistaken, has Venus in Venus's dark arca, and it's just really fascinating to me because, in the eyes of most people, when they see a very good looking woman, and I think even Vivian Lee, if I'm not mistaken, I would have to check again. But either way, it's like really fascinating to me because a lot of these women who, in the eyes of the world, are seen as very beautiful, and when they're asked, like, how did you feel about your beauty, or how do you take care of yourself, and they'll say stuff like, oh, I never saw myself as beautiful, or I grew up being a tomboy, or I remember very distinctly with Angelina Jolie saying that she never saw herself as attractive, and this was back in the day when she was like the hottest thing ever. And she would say things like, I think I look funny, I think I look weird, whatever. And I remember, of course, in the eyes of society, whenever a good looking person says that, they're seen as, oh, they're being vain, they're fishing for compliments, or like, oh, please, she must know she is very good looking. But the truth is, like, if you look at their horoscopes and they genuinely have Venus's dark arca, there could be some very serious signs that this person really was never conscious of how beautiful they are or how beautiful other people perceive them to be. So it's not coming from a place of, fishing for compliments or being manipulative or false modesty or something. It could actually be a genuine feeling, just as a parenthesis. So yeah, either way, this very, very long parenthesis into this is her dark arca, okay? And the Ketu influence probably explains her attraction to, on the one hand, men who are visionary, independent, pioneers with that Ashwini energy. On the other hand, Ashwini can also be youthful, especially in spirit, even if not physical. So, but now that she's dating a much younger man, maybe she is switching on the other end of the pendulum, where she wants to date someone who really embodies the youthfulness of Ashwini in a physical sense. But yeah, and then if you look at his horoscope, his Atmakaraka is Mars, right? Let me check. Yeah, Mars is the planet with the highest degree. And Mars is in Cancer. I think this is Punarvasu. Let me check. Nope, sorry, it's Pushya. Or Ashlesha. Let me double check. No, what was I looking at? Oh my god. Mars is in 27 degrees Aries. Yes, so as I was saying, it's actually in Bharani. It's not in Cancer. Yeah, I was looking at Venus. Hold on, I need to double check this, because according to one source that I have, it looks like it's Bharani. According to another one, it says that it's Kritika. Nope, it's in Kritika. Okay. It's in Kritika Nakshatra, so that would even further emphasize the fact that he is very independent, just like I said earlier. So yeah, both of them wanting to do their own thing. In her case, as I mentioned I think I mentioned her in the video that I did about Kritika and love affairs. I'm not sure, but I definitely thought about mentioning her if I didn't, because she has Mars in Kritika and she was involved in that very public scandal. And in her case, it would be very telling if she does indeed have ascendant in Virgo, like I said, because Mars is involved with the 8th house while being in Kritika. So it would definitely explain the impact on her career and her social status, the fact that it turned into a scandal. But anyway, so he has his Venus in Kritika, which is ruled by the sun. So again, there is the energy of the sun, which is going hand in hand with her Atmakaraka, which is the sun. So her sun, once again, is in Taurus. It's conjunct Mercury, conjunct Mars, conjunct Rahu. And it falls in Rohini, which is ruled by the moon. So there's a bit of moon energy as well. And then his Mars is in Aries. And it's in Kritika. Let me see what else is going on. And it's opposite Jupiter. It is, it's conjunct Ketu. Okay, so we have a double Ketu energy. Both of them are very Ketuvian, actually. And, I somehow overlooked this well, not somehow, I can see why, because his Rahu is right at the beginning of Libra and really close to the house cusp, so I missed it up until this point. But he has Ketu in Aries, which means it's conjunct her Venus. Now, this could shed some light on the fact that this romance fizzled out, because technically, even though Ketu and Venus, and again, I have talked about this. I did a separate video just about this aspect. You can look for it. Brings this kind of deja vu feeling, and a lot of the times it can show a past life connection that for one reason or another was not fulfilled properly, and so in this lifetime the two people feel this very strong compulsion to get together and finally have a relationship that they wanted to have for a very long time. However, irrespective of, because what it shows, according to, again, traditional interpretations, is a past life romantic connection, right? Now, this is a very vague sort of description, because a past life connection could have been, a million things. Could have been, I don't know, you had a love affair, but you were never able to be together, or it could have been that you were stuck in an abusive relationship with this person, right? So it could be either or, right? And in some situations, like I said, so if it's a situation where, let's say, these two people wanted to be together but they never had the chance, this will translate into relationships like these, where the two people actually feel very, very driven to start a relationship together. And however, Ketu, just as I mentioned earlier, has this diminishing energy, which shows that the longer the two people are together, the more diminished the planetary energy becomes. So more specifically, it's the person who has the planet that is going to have that planetary significance decreased in their relationship, in their life, in their personality. So it's seen as particularly bad when it's the woman's Venus and it's the man's Ketu. It's bad even the other way around, but it's particularly bad in this case because for a woman, Venus, again, especially in her case, because her Venus is already not great, okay? Even though this is a really good thing, right? So right off the bat, I should have started by saying that, but I was, sidetracked. I was sidetracked by noticing that he has his Ketu in Aries. But right off the bat, the fact that her Darakaraka is conjunct his Admakaraka, again, very, very strong indicator of compatibility. It shows, again, that her needs, to a large extent, are complementary with his life trajectory. All right? However, as I was saying with this Ketu-Venus thing, is that the longer they are together, the less feminine she will become, the less romance she will feel, the less romantic feeling she will feel. But I think, especially in her case, as I was saying, because Venus is already bad, it's already in 0 degrees, which is not a happy placement, so she most likely has insecurities about her attractiveness. His Ketu, really, being on her Venus, would have made her feel less attractive as time progressed. It would have potentially affected her sense of self-esteem, maybe more, her sense of confidence, even though she also has, Jupiter opposite her Venus, so that's good because Jupiter is positive. It brings a lot of opportunities. It would show increase in wealth, among other things. But because of this Ketu energy, I am willing to bet that this was a significant deal breaker. Now, it could have been also from his side, okay, with the Ketu, as in that he lost interest, because Ketu is an energy that it just shows kind of like a shrinking, if you will. Like it becomes smaller and smaller. Kind of reminds me of that scene from Killing Eve when this is a dark, and never mind, I think if you've seen Killing Eve, you will know exactly what I'm talking about because it was a memorable scene. But if you haven't, I don't want to ruin the mood because it's a dark thing to think about. But it's kind of like, Ketu does connect to death. It does connect to dead bodies, to shrinking, to dissolving of energies. And his Ketu conjunct her Venus could have just been, kind of him moving further and further away from her Venus, becoming less and less interested in her beauty, her femininity, her creativity, etc., right? It could have been. This is one interpretation. Obviously, nobody can know 100% what happened between the two of them, except for them. But this is one way to look at it. Now, another way to look at it is also, but I think that's less likely because, as far as I heard, they were both pretty successful, etc. So, I don't know. I think this is less likely, but could also show that as time progressed, there were just less opportunities for pleasure, for hedonism, for enjoyment, because Venus rules all of these things. Less opportunities for financial growth as well. Maybe they ran into financial hardships, or they just lost interest. I think it's more, with Ketu, it's not so much about conflict or hatred or something. It's just about losing interest. It's just, just like with the Saturn energy that I described earlier, when I said that, with Ketu conjunct Saturn, the obstacles are maximum at the beginning and they decrease as time progresses. The same thing will happen with Venus, except Venus stands for love, and it stands for hedonism and pleasure and enjoyment and all these things. So the same thing would have meant, so similarly, Venus conjunct Ketu could mean the enjoyment, the love was maximum at the beginning and it just kept decreasing after that, right? So that's how these relationships play out, usually. It starts as like a big bang and like, oh my God, especially, at the onset of a relationship, the Venus Ketu tends to show as this love at first sight because there's like this instant recognition, this instant familiarness. But again, depending on the situation, depending on what kind of a past life connection there could have been, and personally, I have not come across a way to actually look at this more in depth. I have some ideas. Maybe at some point when I will have time, I will choose to explore it further. But there is no bulletproof way of actually looking into, as far as I know, no technique that I heard about. Or whoever, if there is someone who knows it, they're gatekeeping it, right? If you can actually see what kind of a past life connection, like this, was this a relationship that ended badly? Was it trauma? You can get hints about it based on what other energies are around it, but it's hard to know exactly, whether it's going to be it's going to be a yay or nay situation, right? Because sometimes you could have Venus conjunct Ketu. Let's say if this is happening between two people who had an abusive relationship in the past, then most likely not only will you not feel attracted, but you will feel repulsed by the person, or you will feel uneasy around them, right? You might be like, oh no, hell no, without even realizing what's going on. Because if you have this, right, and somehow in your subconscious to the power of 100 that goes back thousands of years ago and that is somewhere stored in whatever consciousness is on this planet. I don't know why I'm starting to sound like Teal Swan. Teal Swan would probably call them the Akashic records, but I don't know. I'm just I'm just a simple person. But I think whatever we go through in any lifetime gets stored somewhere. I have ideas about it, but I won't digress too much. Because I've, not by much more than I have already digressed, because I'm already kind of like, running really late with this reading. But yeah, if it's stored somewhere that this person was a bad influence on you in a past life, then you probably will have like a visceral mistrust, maybe repulsion towards them, is what I wanted to say. I just have this very strong hunch now that I look at this Venus Ketu conjunction that this may have been kind of like the silent killer in this relationship, especially because in her case that Venus is a very vulnerable point, Yeah. Okay, so this is the general reading of their aspects. Now, very briefly, I want to look at what houses are being influenced. Let me see. So I mean, do you know that song that starts like, I'm not saying she's a gold digger, but she ain't hanging with no, I think it was by Kanye West, was it? I'm just gonna leave it at that. It's just his Rahu and Jupiter is falling in her second house, especially with her having Venus's dark arca. You know, I was thinking about this as soon as I said that she's now dating a young, handsome guy, but I don't want to be nasty about it. I'm not going to say the words, but you can draw the conclusions, okay? So basically, I think that obviously she could sense the fact that this man could bring a lot of abundance in her life materially. Now, also looking at it from not just a purely materialistic point of view, looking at it more in depth, Jupiter going into the second house, this is also a boost of the self-esteem, at least initially, before that Ketu Venus started to, kick in. But at least in the initial stages, no doubt, this woman felt that he was a big confidence boost, and especially with the Jupiter, there would have been this feeling of comfort, of feeling accepted on a deeper level, maybe seen. And another interesting way to look at it, but I don't know if in her case this would be much of an influence, because again, I vaguely remember that she doesn't have much of a connection to her family of origin. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't have time to stop again and look into it because I will never finish this video. But Rahu in the second house normally would be a separating aspect. So one way to look at this could be that this relationship, or he somehow kept her separated from her family somehow. That could be one way to look at it, but I don't know if there is, any evidence to support this. One way to notice, which I think is pretty important, is his Saturn in her third house. Now, again, this could have been a boost of, again, creativity in terms of her taking matters into her own hands with respect to her career. So a boost in her courage, her confidence, because Saturn being a malefic actually does very well in the third house. And in this case, in Synastry, the third house this is how I would read it intuitively, would be that this man, especially since, again, this Saturn is looking at the 10th house lord, provided that she actually has rising in Virgo. I'm going to stop saying provided that she has her rising in Virgo, because I worked on this assumption. This is my assumption now. I'm going to stick with it. So, yes, his Saturn in her third, aspecting the Lord of the 10th house, would have given her a very great boost in her career. Really encouraged her to grow professionally and to be more independent and take the bull by the horns, in terms of what she wants. And then, of course, with her Ketu in the third, I think his Saturn backing up her Ketu in the third would have increased her confidence in her thought processes, in her not just thought processes, but in her ability to communicate and her intellectual abilities, in general. So I think she may have felt that he was a slow, steady supporter of her development, and maybe, I don't know if this is the case, I don't know, I'd have to look into it, but it would be interesting if someone would look into this, if she became maybe more outgoing or something after this relationship. Maybe outgoing is not the best word, but more confident, especially in the way that she would express herself verbally, or in writing, or in acting. It makes a lot of sense. Or singing. I don't know if she's into it. I doubt it, but because I haven't heard of it. But yeah, any kind of communication that would have been on a boost, basically, a support, a slow and steady source of support. And now his moon in her 5th house, great combination for artists because this would have supported and nurtured her creativity. And again, would have made her feel loved for who she is because the 5th house is the house of our deepest self, our truest self. This is why 5th house is about self-expression. It's about the heart chakra. And this is why malefics in the 5th house don't do well. Again, makes me think of another video idea that I had ages ago, but I forgot about it. Will not digress this time. Maybe remind me every once in a while. If you are curious of any of the topics that I mentioned, please remind me every once in a while through a comment or a post or something on my community that I said I was going to do something. Anyway, moon in the 5th, great support, would have helped her a lot. And also definitely for an actress, even more so, like I said. So someone who nurtured her ability to express herself would have made for a very, very creative, creatively stimulating relationship, basically. And then there's her Eros opposite his moon, okay? A lot of attraction. Definitely repeated themes of attraction going on here. And then there's his Mars into her 8th house conjunct her Venus. This is, yeah. I can understand why there was a lot of passion and how technically she got pregnant right on set or something. While hopefully not actually on set, but like while they were working on the production of Planet of the Apes, which is where they met. And yeah, because these are, this is a very intensely sexual connection, especially with the 8th house, which is very, well, it is on the one hand connected to taboo things, but 8th house is about passions. It is about, feelings that run deep, that are very, very intense and brooding and everything. So it's scorpionic energy, right? And it's also about the depth of a person's psychology, really. Another way to look at it, again, because Mars is falling into the house of the in-laws, basically. This could have meant that he didn't get along with his family. I don't know, but it is one way to look at it. And let's see. Venus falling into her 11th house would have meant a very strong friendship relationship. So this makes a lot of sense because it does seem to me like they are friendly even now. I don't know if they are, but at least maybe to the world they seem very friendly. I don't know. But either way, with that Ketu, Saturn, very strong glue that holds them together, and a lot of supportive aspects in Synastry, no doubt that this is a very solidly founded relationship that, like I said, is probably not gonna go away 100% at any point. But yeah, so his Venus falling into the 11th would have shown her that he was stimulating her to become more open towards social interactions, maybe opened up her social circle, gave her access to a different crowd, and maybe increased her ability to have friends to some extent. It also, again, activates the 11th house, which technically is a house of wealth and gains. I mean, the 11th house is, even more specifically, gains from the career. Okay? So this makes a lot of sense, okay? Because they worked very well, right? So this relationship, to a large extent, was really fueled by their ability to cooperate and really support each other's life paths. I can see this right off the bat. And from her perspective, again, because she has that Venus dark Arca, I'm not saying she's a gold digger, but no doubt having someone with all these heavy financially boosting aspects onto her horoscope, that would have been like very motivating for her. Okay, I'm just gonna leave it at that. And then there's the Sun, Pluto, Mercury falling onto her 12th house, which is the house of, again, hidden affairs. It's the subconscious. It's places of isolation, potentially. I think this would have just explained, again, a stimulating of creativity, of imagination. And I have to say, again, according to Vedic astrology, 12th house is, together with the 7th, it's one of those houses that's very connected to sexual activity. Okay, so like a lot of bedroom activities potentially. So yeah, this is pretty much what I can see from, especially from his horoscope and its influence on her horoscope. But of course, together with everything else that I covered so far, which is the influence of the chart interaspects, which go both ways for both of them. Okay, so moving on to her influence on him. Again, I'm not going to go over the aspects because I've already covered everything unless I notice something that I missed. So I'm just going to look over how her planets fall over his houses and what this means for him. So again, you're going to see his placements are with the blue and her placements are with the red. In this case, from his perspective, at least, we have an official time of birth, so there's no any kind of interpretation here with respect to the time of birth. So in other words, we can trust that the houses, his houses with the blue, look the way that they do. The first thing that I notice is, again, Moon Pluto. So her Moon Pluto falls into his 4th house. Very strong emotional connection. And I have to say, this is really fascinating because from his perspective, Sun is in the 4th house. This is not a happy Sun, but Sun is strong because it's a Leo. Conjunct Pluto power plays. Now, the way to interpret this is that his mother, and I'm going to get Freudian here. So I'm giving you a warning. His mother carried Sun properties, so Sun elements. So this means that he saw his mother as a Sun dominant woman, okay? A strong, potentially a little bit self-absorbed, but strong, nevertheless, willful, powerful, self-motivated woman who carried a lot of what society would deem traditionally masculine traits. And then if you look at his Darakaraka, which one was it? Mercury. Yeah. Mercury happens to be conjunct the Sun. So I guess Freud was not entirely wrong. I'm just, trying to be funny here because, look, again, I won't get into psychology. This reminds me of yet another video. So please let me know if you're curious to hear more about my theories about how astrology really intertwines with psychology and what insights I've learned actually in terms of relationships. But anyway, it makes sense that, not just that he would be attracted to Helena Bonham Carter or women who have strong personalities in general, especially women who would be involved with creative professions because of the Sun energy, but it also makes sense that he would really be drawn to her because she has her Moon and Pluto in his 4th house. So this really activates that mother archetype because the 4th house is the mother archetype to some extent, together with the Moon, right? His Moon is also in the 9th house. But the mother archetype, right, is at least partially represented by the 4th house, and it shows how we viewed our mother. So it shows that he was comfortable with women who have strong personalities. And now her Moon, again, supporting his Sun. The Sun is not happy in the 4th house. It's probably the least positive. Actually, not probably. According to many traditional sources that I read, Sun in the 4th house by directional strength is the weakest Sun, right? So directional strength refers to the strength of a planet by house placement. And the reason why it's the weakest is because the 4th technically represents nighttime, so the sun is nowhere to be seen. Now, that's one, I guess, if you will, more primitive, quote unquote, explanation. But yeah, pretty much, because it's the imum coeli, or like, the lowest point of the horoscope. That's the night, basically. So the sun is strong when it's in the ascendant, when it's in the first house, right after sunrise. That's when it's strong, when it's bright on the sky, right? Anyway, the bottom line is that this is not a happy sun in the fourth house. And with her moon there, this would have helped heal his sun related issues. So again, he would have also had some potential confidence issues. Now, I don't know if he still had confidence issues by the time that he got together with her. Maybe, some deeply rooted confidence issues. She definitely would have helped to mend a lot of that with that naturally supportive moon energy. Aside from that, what I'm seeing is Lilith in his 10th house. I think in this case is kind of relative, because hello, she was his muse, and in many ways, and she is kind of this wild, unconventional Lilith archetype. I think maybe her Lilith in the 10th house helped him take courage to pursue some ideas or some visions that maybe he otherwise wouldn't have gotten, or maybe he wouldn't have otherwise had the courage to pursue them. So yes, I mean, it's like he probably looked at her as the chance to be his usual weird self to a higher extent than ever. And then Saturn going, so this is fascinating, because from her perspective, it was his Venus going into her 11th house. From his perspective, it's her Saturn going into the 11th house. So this would have shown that he may have perceived her as restricting his social interaction, Now, this could have been done directly, maybe. I don't know, she didn't like his friends, or it could have been done indirectly, like maybe once they got together, they just weren't as social in other ways. Or again, this could have been not necessarily related to social relations, but relating to finances. See, this would have shown that he may have seen her as a restrictive force on his gains, which I know doesn't sound nice, but considering the fact that her chart shows the opposite from her perspective, I think this could have been the case, actually. Aside from that, Venus in the 12th house. I was just looking at Rahu. So yeah, her Rahu, Mars, and Mercury and Sun all falling in his ascendant. Very stimulating for his confidence. Again, what was I just saying? This leads me to another video that I did where I kind of talked about this slightly at the end. I did a video on the challenges of men with Sun as Darakarka. I do recommend you watch that if you're curious. But I briefly mentioned there that usually for a man especially, but irrespective, right? Because everybody needs to have Sun. Sun represents confidence. It represents, your zest for life, your how motivated you are, everything. And when the Sun is weak in the horoscope, shows confidence issues. It shows a lot of second guessing, problems with indecision, problems with clarity, because Sun also rules reason. This is why we have, for instance, in English, you have the expression to shed light on something. Because when you shed light on something, it means you actually expose it for what it is. You see things clearly, right? Sun is reason. It's reasoning ability. It's ability to to see things the way they are, to say things the way they are. This is why Sun dominant people, most of the times, they have a reputation, especially with Kritika, of being very blunt.
They just tell it like it is. Unless the sun is very damaged, in which case, and or there are other influences, you will see people who tend to, uh, like to twist the truth a lot. But most of the times, sun is about honesty. It's about being blunt. It's about being straightforward, having that confidence of saying, this is who I am, take it or leave it. Having the a capacity to say no when you have to say no, having strong boundaries, and yeah, all that. Everything that comes with confidence, basically. And so when a man has a weak sun or weakened sun, whether by directional strength, whether by sign or aspected by malefics in this case, technically it's not exactly a very malefic placement that he has, but hold on, let me check. 7, 8, yeah. 7, 8, 9, 10. It's aspected by Saturn, and let me see, where is it? Yeah. It's not, yeah, it is, it's aspected by Ketu. So this shows me that right off the bat, I haven't even searched into this man's life. I don't know what his situation was, but I'm curious. So if any of you know, or I don't know, if I don't forget, because I'm off my ADHD meds, so I forget everything. Partially off. I'm not even fully off. You should see me when I'm fully off. I might forget, but right off the bat, what I'm sensing from this man's horoscope was that he had an absent father, one way or another, and the mother was forced to take on the father's responsibilities. Because sun is in the 4th house, mother is taking on the father's responsibilities, taking on the father's role. Now, this could have happened. I'm not blaming his father or something, because I don't know what the story was there. This could have been, again, father could have been sick, unable to take care of them properly. Father could have bailed out on him. He never knew his father or something. Father could have passed away when he was relatively young, left the family in hardship. But Ketu aspecting the sun by 5th does show me that there was a distance. At the very least, even if the father was physically there, maybe helping to pay the bills, there could have been a significant lack of interest from the father. Maybe the father never wanted the kid, didn't have an interest in being a father, etc., etc. Somehow there was a feeling of lacking and at the same time restriction because of that Saturn energy. So the Saturn energy can show material hardship. So that's kind of what I'm feeling here, potentially. I would have to look more in depth, and again, I don't have time to also look at his horoscope in depth. But yes, there would have been some kind of hardships here that left him lacking in the father department, because when the sun is weak in the horoscope, that's basically what it shows, a weak father figure. So a healthy sun, just like in psychology, if a person has and this is something, don't take my word for it, do your own research, right? There have been studies upon studies that show that a healthy father figure, even for girls, which a lot of people underestimate, shows very strong confidence. It shows a tendency, higher chances of being successful in life from every aspect. Because a healthy father figure, what a healthy father figure does is teach you to fend for yourself, teach you to know yourself, teach you confidence, right? This is why in the old days, fathers would take their sons hunting, for instance, because they would teach them how to handle themselves in different situations. And in today's, because of misogyny and everything, I'm digressing into psychology, but oftentimes because of misogyny, fathers don't really see the point of cultivating confidence in their daughters. Or there are fathers who overdo it and they forget that their daughters are women and they try to turn their daughters into men. This is how you get, daughters who learn how to shoot by the time they're like, 10 years old. But that's, I won't, again, this is psychology, won't get too much into it. But there is a parallel, right, to astrology, because when you see a weak sun not often, literally all the time. Like, I've not seen a situation where I saw like a really weak or damaged sun in the horoscope and that person told me, oh, I had a great relationship with my father. It's not going to happen. It's, all to some extent, there's always going to be some significant lacking in that department. And this leads to, again, usually if in his case, my main feeling is that the father was absent based on these aspects, right? If there would have been, if you're hearing a weird noise, that's my stomach. If there would have been a lot of, Mars influence potentially, maybe some maybe some Rahu, but especially Mars, then I would have said, okay, this could have been a case of violence, right? Because the father could have been violent or something. And when you see those cases, there will be cases where the father is how should I put it, present, but in a negative way. So, those kinds of fathers who just tear their kids down. So they're there, but, they put impossible tasks, expectations on them. They try to raise them like they're in military boot camp, right? So instead of actually working with the child and understanding what they need and, adjusting to their level, they just basically bulldoze over the child and try to shove a square peg into a round hole. And those kinds of fathers are potentially worse than just not having a father at all. Because then you're looking at people who have to undo a lot of abusive and limiting beliefs. And usually those will be people who, again, have, like I said, damaged sun placements. Now, there are also nakshatras, as I mentioned before, that would hint to having really damaged relationships with parents. Okay. Again, I have videos on my channel that talk about this. I actually had a video that was called Bad Childhoods, right? Or the Astrology of Bad Childhoods. So I do recommend looking for that, again, in case I forget to link it. But the bottom line is that in her case, Moon is conjunct his sun, and her sun and Mars fall into his first house, boosting his confidence, okay? Boosting his vitality, his energy, because her sun is now lighting up his first house, the house of self, giving renewed sense of purpose, renewed confidence and vitality. Very supportive, together with Mars as well. And she also, so in her case, actually, her sun is pretty strong, okay? His sun, from a position perspective, is also pretty strong. So sun in Leo is dignified. It's in its own element. But his sun is, again, with Pluto. It's aspected by Saturn, aspected by Ketu, falling in the 4th house. Not the happiest placement. From her perspective, the sun is in, first of all, it's conjunct Mars in Kritika, which is a very strong boost. It's with a friend. So sun there with Mars is very strongly supported. Now, Rahu, debatable, not that great of an influence, but I think overall her energy somehow boosted his confidence, boosted his faith in himself and his path, and again, made him feel that there's nothing wrong with him, that he can be himself, right? Because there's an alignment between, again, his basic way of presenting himself in the world, which is shown by the ascendant, his things that he identifies with, and on the other hand, her trajectory in life, very, very much the trajectory in life, because the sun, it's also called, I think the word is Charat Makarka, but I'm not 100% sure. I don't remember if it was Charat Makarka or Atmakarka. One of them is the general Atmakarka, which is the sun, okay? So the general Atmakarka just means that the sun is an Atmakarka for everyone. So for everyone, the sun, to a large extent, shows why you are here. It shows the soul. But then there's the personal Atmakarka, which, like I said, is the planet with the highest degree in the D1 or natal horoscope. And that is even more of a strong indicator of the reason why you're here. So in her case, the sun has a double meaning. Not only is it just the sun in and of itself, which carries some significance of a life purpose, but it's definitely her life purpose because it's her personal Atmakarka as well, because it's the planet with the highest degree. And so in this, expression, once again, what I see is a very strong, complementary, mutually beneficial relationship here. This mutual support between the two of them by just being themselves, right? So I feel like, especially if they're truly neurodivergent, which would make sense personally from my perspective, I'm sure that this relationship was very healing and very mutually supportive, and probably made them feel like, oh, wow, I finally found someone that I could be myself with, which is a big deal, especially if you're neurodivergent. So, yeah, this is what I'm seeing. Basically, this is pretty much it. I've covered all of the overlays, I think. Yeah, pretty much. And now, finally, moving on to the composite chart. So, looking at the composite chart, right off the bat, I think I mentioned this as well as I was doing the reading. The reading so far, the previous part. They have Sun, Mercury conjunct, and it also happens to be conjunct Juno. Now, I, again, have not done a lot of research about Juno, but I think it would definitely help. And one thing that stood out to me, because I have done quite a bit of research on this, is the Eros conjunct Venus conjunct Mars in Taurus, okay? Very, very strongly attractive aspect. So right off the bat, Venus conjunct Mars in the composite would show a kind of relationship where the two people never get tired of each other sexually, technically. And having Eros thrown in the mix with that would have boosted this, to a very high extent. And not only that, but again, because these are artistic people, this would have been a very creative energy between the two of them, where they're mutually inspired, they're mutually motivated to create beautiful things, etc., etc. And here we have Venus in Taurus and Mars in Taurus. So Venus has the upper hand here, because if this would have been, let's say if this would have been an Aries, and I know this is debatable because her time of birth technically is unknown, but I have a very strong intuitive feeling that I got her time of birth known. I got her time of birth accurately, But either way, okay, so I'm just gonna go with the flow here. If this conjunction would happen in a more negative sign, like let's say in Scorpio or Aries, where Venus would have had less of an advantage, because Venus would have been outside of its sign that it governs, and Mars would have been stronger being in Scorpio or Aries, which are the signs that it governs. This could have been an aspect that produces a lot of arguments, a lot of fights, a lot of too much passion, could have burned out faster. But the fact that Venus has the upper hand in this conjunction would show that Venus is leading. So they're leading with love and understanding. Even though there's passion and everything, Venus has the upper hand, has Mars under control to some extent, if you will. So in other words, Mars is serving, the Mars of energy is serving the Venus, not the other way around. Now, if you look at, again, going back to that Sun Mercury, so again, this would show very good understanding. I've actually done a video about, did I say Mars? Sun Mercury. Anyway, Sun Mercury, right? In the 12th house here. I did a video, one of the first videos that I did on my channel, I think, or one of the ones that really gained traction, is called Sun Mercury Composite. In the composite, Sun Mercury conjunct in the composite, and the false promise of compatibility. Now, I've had a lot of people who I absolutely can't stand this, where people start to, they'll listen to a video for like 2 minutes and then they'll be like, that's not what this means. Like, unless you listen to all of it, and yes, I know that's asking for a lot. But really, unless you listen to all of it and you take into account everything that I say, what's the point of commenting, based on some prejudicial opinion or something? Because a lot of people have commented, not a lot of people, but over the years, I have had some comments on that video where people were like, oh, this is negative, this is depressing, or it's too negative. I mentioned there, I didn't say that the aspect in and of itself is negative, okay? This is a good aspect to have, but I warned of how it can signal false compatibility even when there isn't much ground for compatibility. Obviously, not the case with this couple here, because I just did their Synastry overlays, and they have very strong signs of compatibility. But this would have been a boost in terms of, just like I mentioned in that video, this is the kind of intellectual compatibility where people will finish each other's sentences, okay? Finish each other's sentences. Like, they will think as one. They will have very similar thought patterns, ideas, you know, ways of communicating. They will feel like they can really understand each other. So it's a very positive aspect to have. Aside from that, we have Jupiter and Pluto technically in the second house, again, if the time of birth is correct. So this would be transformative in terms of finances. I'm guessing mostly for the better. Jupiter is pretty strong in Leo. And this is Magha Nakshatra. And again, Magha is about fame. Another thing that I noticed, speaking of Magha and speaking of Taurus, is for both of them, they have planets conjunct each other's natal charts, okay? So she has that cluster of Sun, Mars, Mercury, Rahu in Taurus. And that means that all of those planets are conjunct the composite Venus and Mars. So clearly, this shows that she would have felt this relationship was really helping her, taking her where she wanted in life, okay? Especially with the conjunction to Rahu. This is interesting. I think this is the second, at least, famous couple that I look at who have this, where the composite Mars is conjunct one of their individual Rahus, in this case, her individual Rahu. The Mars-Rahu aspect is a very negative one, and I did a separate video on it. Because it increases aggression and arguments as time progresses. And I remember saying this also with this other couple. I don't remember who it was. And I still stand by it. I would have to do more research because it's not like I see these kinds of composites. I sound like like Hollum. They tricks us. Filthy hobbitses. Anyway, so I don't see these, it's not like I see this aspect in composite very often, but my intuitive feeling would be that somehow as time progresses, there would be some elements of this relationship that become aggravating to her, you know, piss her off in some way. Or it could be that the two of them together, or the relationship itself, like the direction that the relationship is taking, seems somehow to impede, or even impede basically her progress in life, because that's what Ketu would stand for. Somehow bring obstacles onto her course in life that she did not expect, or she felt that she didn't sign up for. That could be a one way to look at it. With Venus, on the other hand, Venus conjunct Rahu is a good thing because, again, ka-ching. So as Venus, so from her perspective, like she really, from her perspective, at least financially, this would have seemed like a gold mine. Because her, you know, composite Venus conjunct her Rahu would have shown not just that she would have felt, you know, that she was heading towards material abundance, but also Venus's love and acceptance and all that, and conjunct her personal sun, especially, would have shown that she felt accepted. Like she felt that this relationship would allow her to be herself and to feel loved for who she really is. Especially for a woman, again, who has sun is on Makarka. This would have been a very important thing for her. And Rahu is, again, notice this. Notice the fact that Rahu is falling in the first house. This is another indicator to me personally, a strong indicator that her time of birth is accurate, because Rahu in the first house would have made a lot of sense, you know, would have given them both a strong sense of purpose in the relationship, and also shows that them together as a couple become very focused on themselves. Not so much, you know, focused on other people, but more on themselves, their own self-expression, being themselves, doing what they want, etc. Maybe also focused on their image, though, as well. And Rahu in, I did say that I was going to check this from this perspective, because the ascendant technically also shows how people perceive the couple. How people perceive you two as a couple. The hypothetical you two, you know what I mean? And so Rahu here is a strong indicator of a couple that will be perceived as eccentric. unusual, you know? And also in Cancer, I think very emotionally tied together. And then Saturn falling in the 7th house, this would have been a binding aspect, especially since it's also conjunct Ketu. Again, so that Ketu conjunction is happening in the composite as well. Very, very solid relationship here. Very solidly founded. This is probably like the most solid relationship I've ever seen, despite the potential negative aspects. And if you also look at it closely, you will see Saturn is trining the Mars-Venus conjunction and the Eros. So it's very, very stabilizing. This shows, you know, when Saturn gives an easy aspect, especially to this, you know, very lovey-dovey aspect, like the Mars-Venus, yeah? Especially with Eros thrown in the mixed, thrown in the mist. As you can see, I've been speaking for too long. Anyway, with Saturn aspecting this is like turning a bright fire into warm, slow burning embers, right? That are like become more quiet, but they have more staying power. It brings that durability and more of that glue. And then Ketu also gives a trine to Venus and Mars, which I guess on a less favorable note could also hint a little bit towards lack of interest over time. But it also would show a very intuitive bond, right? Especially again for two people who are very artistic. Ketu is very focused on intuition. It's on, you know, a kind of connection. It's a kind of energy that is almost psychic. So it would show a very, very strong, very close, intimate connection between the two of them. And very instinctive, okay? And then Moon in the 4th house is a very happy moon, okay? Because this is Moon in its own house. It's you know, it's the queen of its castle over here. Because the 4th house is the home base. It's domestic life. And Moon in Libra is, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily call it very strong, but it's not very bad either. Moon in Libra is in a sign ruled by Venus, so it is pretty healthy. And also Venus in Taurus, yes. Taurus in the 11th house, again, I have to say, this relationship was set up for abundance on a material plane. And plenty, with Venus in Taurus, plenty of opportunities for sensuality, for hedonism, for all this, which again, considering the things that we just saw in Helena Bonham Carter's chart about her Venus as dark arca, would make a lot of sense, would be very supportive, okay? So, yeah, this is pretty much, I mean, and Jupiter is aspecting the 10th house. It's aspecting the 6th house, which again boosts career opportunities, boosts social status, boosts also a desire to be of service, but it shows ease of working together as a couple, especially with that 5th aspect on the 6th. And another thing that is important to note is that, well, there's one bad thing that I definitely see. There are multiple bad things. One bad thing to take into account is Saturn is squaring the moon. Now, this is not ideal. And before I get comments about this, yes, square is technically a tropical aspect, but I use it because I've seen it to be accurate. Okay, so I said this a million times, like I use aspects that I have found mostly based on my empirical research are very effective. They're very much active and they're casting an influence onto people's lives. And, you know, Saturn squaring the moon is not great because this would show a kind of coldness, a kind of emotional detachment happening here. And at least to some extent, right? Some kind of a conflict between the two people's emotional needs on the one hand and their professional needs, which would be shown by Saturn on the other hand. On a positive note, though, there is I just noticed something. Oh yeah, there's a trine between the moon and the sun again. So not only does she have her moon conjunct his sun when it comes to just looking at each other's horoscopes and how their two individual charts overact, but they also have the trine and the composite. This is very, very healthy, okay? A very harmonious blending of masculine and feminine, which no doubt I would say was the main reason why the relationship lasted for as long as it did, because it gave this very strong stability, right? And this strong harmony and this feeling of we can both be ourselves and do our own thing at the same time, which, considering their individual horoscopes, is very important. Another thing that I noticed, which I think is pretty relevant, is the fact that Mars is squaring Pluto and it's squaring Venus. Okay. I did a video not too long ago, as in just a few short months ago, I did a video where I talked about Venus, Pluto, and composite charts and how it's the heartbreak aspect. As I was doing my research, I actually came across an article where Helena Bonham Carter talked about how devastated she was after the separation, that to her it felt like a divorce, and she, even though they were not married, she actually kind of referred to it, or at least deep down felt like what she went through was a divorce because it was so horrible. So I was gonna say that as I was doing research, I came across an article that said that she was very devastated. So I just paused and I had to look more into details, and I found the evidence that I kind of suspected, which is that she was the one who said, neither one of them ever clearly said exactly what happened, but she was quoted to say, "I did not leave," so to speak. So the idea being that basically the breakup came from his side. Which, I hate to say this, but like I said, astrology is very accurate. Now, actually, she was also the one who was quoted to say that, sometimes it's not meant to be together, but the relationship feels like a gift. Oh, and apparently she said that the tensions while filming Sweeney Todd were extremely difficult. There was a lot of fighting. Okay, so that makes sense. I would argue the fighting comes from the fact that both of them are very strong personalities, but I would also tend to think that Mars-Saturn opposition has something to do with it, that they have between their two individual charts. And this Venus-Pluto, like I said, and also this Mars-Pluto, by the way, because it's both of them. So Venus-Pluto, I talked about it in depth in that video that I talked about, and I know a lot of people don't want to hear this because they don't want to be like, what do you mean is the heartbreak aspect? Look, just like she said, it's not like all relationships are meant to last. It doesn't mean that just because a relationship ends, it's, it was pointless or something. Of course, everything is a learning experience, but my personal advice is, if you're looking for someone to be with for a very long time, potentially forever, do not go for relationships where you have Venus-Pluto squares or oppositions. This is my advice. I've seen this so often, especially, I've actually seen some cases from older generations, right? Because like people say, well, the reason people in the past stay together, well, is because, women were not feminist. That was not what I was going to say, but this is what a lot of people say, especially male people will say this. But no, the main thing that people will say is that, people respected marriage. They stayed together. Marriage was serious. Yeah, but what you see when you look at some older generation marriages is that they're based on one partner taking shit, And a lot of the times, as time progresses, even when they stay together, one of them feels alone, So, and a lot of the times when you look at it from an astrological perspective, you will see these kinds of aspects. I said this in that video. Pluto, I mean, I don't know if I said it, but again, speaking of videos that I've been meaning to do for a very long time, I want to do a video, either a separate video for every aspect between Pluto and other planets, or a video for all. I'm going to think about it. But I definitely want to talk about Pluto hard aspects and easy aspects in the composite charts, because they're extremely strong, very, very relevant. I mean, it's amazing because Pluto is, again, well, first of all, the entire concept of composite chart is not really looked at from the Vedic perspective, but it's extremely insightful, and you see patterns over patterns. Like, I will look at hundreds of charts and you get the same result. So but whatever, I'm not judging anything or anyone. Everyone has, there are different schools of astrology depending on empirical research. But again, I'm not saying any aspect is a deal breaker, but there's only so much you're willing to take, and it's like, yes, some aspects can lead to such a level of misery that it gets to the point where you're like, why am I here? Like, why am I even bothering with this relationship? And I think personally, this is why I study astrology. This is why I do readings. This is why I use astrology on a regular basis. I mean, I use astrology and tarot on a daily basis. I cannot imagine living without it. Because it has helped me dodge so many bullets in life, not just when it comes to like potential romantic interests. That's just the tip of the iceberg, because like it can help you with anything. Bosses, like, coworkers. The only obstacle is the fact that you can't get everyone's date of birth. But anyway, let me not digress. My point being, I know people don't want to hear this, especially if they are in relationships where they have this Venus-Pluto hard aspect. They'll cling to any glimmer of hope that, oh no, it's not going to happen like this because look, we love each other. Yes, this is where astrology helps you. Same thing with everyone who gets into a relationship where they have Saturn conjunct Rahu. They'll be like, oh, but we're so in love. How can things go wrong? They can go wrong in a million ways. But again, it's up to you. Look, again, I'm not saying give up the relationship, but I'm saying people should know what they're getting into. People should know that when they're getting into a relationship with someone where they have a Saturn conjunct Rahu, that things are just going to get worse as time progresses. And you may, at the beginning, think, wow, this is great. I'm with my soulmate. But, 10 years down the line, after God knows how many failed fertility treatments and sickness and poverty and, the fact that you're apart half the year or more because you can't find work together in the same area, it's going to put so much pressure on the relationship that it's going to break. It doesn't mean that you have to break. You can keep going, and you just can, be there like alone on a stone, on an iceberg in the Arctic or something, fighting for your life just for the sake of keeping this relationship going. And the question is like, you should be aware. You should know, hey, you're heading for a really rough ride. Do you still think it's going to be worth it or not? I think people should be made aware of this. You want to see, just to give an example of relationships that lasted in the past. This woman who married the king that abdicated, what was her name? Wallace something. I don't remember her full name, but I talked about her in, I think, the Lilith Synastry videos. Wallace Simpson, wasn't it? I think that's her name. And the guy was Edward the something. Whatever. He was supposed to be the king of England, but he abdicated the throne for her. They had a Mars-Rahu conjunction, and she was the Mars. And they stayed together forever. But according to, if you look into it, she was not happy. And if you see pictures of them 20 years into the relationship, she has a very deep frown line above her nose. Now, you can choose. Now, you can, the naysayers of astrology will be like, you're just looking for things that aren't there. Of course I am. But you know what? I tell people all the time, and they're like, yeah, never mind. I still have the hots for someone that I have Mars conjunct Rahu with. And I'm like, good, go knock yourself out. In fact, you won't have to, because they might knock you out. You know what I mean? especially if you're the Rahu in the relationship. Because, yeah, just using this as an example, I talked about this in I think, the video that I did about aspects that might be too much work or deal breakers in Synastry, because some of them, they will just put you through it, and because people, they think they're above it, they think they're above the system, and I don't, with peace and love, I don't look at it from an arrogant perspective, because I myself have made the mistake when it came to transits, and sometimes even with Synastry. I made some stupid mistakes early on in my life when I didn't know as much astrology, and, had to learn some things through the school of hard knocks, because things, some aspects you just have no control over. Some things you can control, some things you just can't, right? And yeah, my point is, it's better if you know from the beginning exactly what you are going to embark on, right? What you can expect. And this was my view, honestly, from the beginning when I saw them together. Honestly, I don't think I said this, but I don't think I said it because it's negative, right? But from the beginning, when I started seeing pictures and images with them together, I always felt like she was the one who was more attached. Now, I'm not saying that her attachment, I don't know, was pure or better or whatever, but she was more attached, okay? So I think she counted on him more than the other way around. I don't know, like, this is my vibe, but the fact that they have, Pluto square Venus in the composite would tend to kind of support the idea, because it looks to me, especially since she said that she was not the one who called it quits, that she was the one who was more attached to the relationship. Maybe, again, also because, this is another important thing to look at. Composite Jupiter and Pluto are conjunct her moon, provided the time of birth that I guessed for her is correct, which I think it is, moon in Magha. Okay, so this is actually something that I just noticed, and it's going to help me with the next segment of this Synastry analysis, which is the Nadikut and the fertility thing, because there was something that I noticed there that didn't make sense, but now it does. And then there's the Pluto thing that I wanted to talk about. So Pluto is an energy that cuts deep. Okay, these are very strong aspects, and yes, they had mutual Pluto aspects in between their individual charts, if you remember. If you don't, then you can watch the entire previous 1 hour and a half. At some point in there, I mention it. So that would mean that they were both attached, but she, in addition, also has her Pluto, composite Pluto, conjunct her moon. So that would mean for her, she was very deeply emotionally attached to this relationship, to the relationship itself, almost. Like Moon Pluto, again, I'm going to talk about this because Moon Pluto is, I don't think I talked about it so far, but Venus Pluto, I would argue Venus Pluto and Moon Pluto are probably the most painful aspects to have in a composite chart, right? Even in Synastry, in between two charts, it can be painful. But Venus Pluto, again, hard aspects, hands down. I've never seen a relationship with Venus Pluto hard aspect in the composite that was like a happily ever after. It always ends with one person loving the other one more and feeling horribly betrayed and destroyed emotionally afterwards. So this is why, personally, I do not recommend it. It doesn't matter how many boxes the relationship may tick. I don't recommend it. That's all I'm going to say. So I had to take a short break. I was going to check Tim. Yeah, if you hear the weird noises, that's my stomach. But I was going to check basically Tim Burton's chart and how it relates to the composite, because this is something that I often do, and I think it's really important to see how the relationship influences each of them and how they each feel about the relationship. One thing that I noticed with both of them is that the composite chart conjuncts their moon. Sorry, the composite chart Jupiter conjuncts. So for her, actually, it wasn't the composite Jupiter. Which was it? Oh yeah. So it was the composite Jupiter conjunct her moon. And for him, it's composite Jupiter conjunct his sun. Sorry, not his moon. So his sun and Mercury, which, his Mercury is the Darakarka again. But what I was going to say is that it doesn't surprise me that despite the fact that in their Guna Milan score, which is the, I'm going to talk about this after the composite a little bit. It's a Vedic system that does a score of how compatible a couple is. And this is also leading me to why, personally, I do not follow that score again, nor do I follow any typical traditional teaching to a T, basically. Because you always have to put things into context, and you have to rather look at the meaning and the patterns existing overall between two people rather than just, some simple algorithm, because astrology is just not mathematics. As much as I know anybody would love for astrology to work the way that mathematics does so that we can have some perfect algorithm. And sure, we can do everything in our power to simplify, but the truth is that it's not an exact science. It's not like in mathematics where, if you have 5 variables, you can do a system of 5 equations or something and find each of the variables. It's just not going to happen like that, because it's like you have an infinity of variables that each of them depend on countless other things. And you have to it's this entire cluster cluster fluck of information that you need to piece together and look at it from like a million different angles before you start to see what patterns are fitting where. And so my point was that despite the fact that they have a low score of the health compartment together, they produced 2 healthy children that were conceived naturally. Okay. And this is shown, first of all, I think the fact that they wanted to be parents together is shown by this mutual aspect of the Jupiter. So for him, Jupiter conjunct his sun would have, again, the relationship itself, going back to the idea that his sun was damaged, the relationship itself, having that Jupiter conjunct and Pluto, because composite Jupiter is with Pluto, so it's a kind of a double-edged situation where on the one hand, yes, the Jupiter is boosting his sun, boosting his confidence, but on the other hand, that Pluto may have dredged up any kind of father wounds or confidence wounds that he had, basically. Not just because he has the composite Pluto conjunct his sun, but he also has her Pluto conjunct his sun, okay? But that Jupiter, because Jupiter is about legacy and it's about children, and I did this, by the way, I did a video about aspects that boost fertility, okay? And I talked about how composite Jupiter aspecting the moon is one of those aspects. Now, in the composite, right, they have a sextile between the moon and Jupiter, which is a pretty soft, I didn't even take it into account because, again, I think it may have helped, definitely, because it definitely didn't hurt things, right? So having a sextile between the composite moon and Jupiter is better than nothing, but it's a very mild aspect. I would argue the fact that the composite Jupiter was conjunct her moon was a bigger fertility aspect than the composite Jupiter sextile the composite moon, you know what I mean? But either way, again, I don't want to get too much into theory here, more than the 4 hours I've already recorded, but astrology, to a large extent, it's not supernatural. It shows how your reality arranges around you. So anything you see through a horoscope, to some extent, you could also see through, not anything, actually. That's not the best way to say it. I don't know how to explain it exactly, but there's always like a correlation, basically, between real life and astrology, right? And when it comes to this Jupiter and fertility thing, I basically touched upon this actually in the video that I did, I'm pretty sure, as far as I remember. So I do recommend you watch it if you're curious about this. But the bottom line is that I also mentioned, I think in that video, is that they're fertility boosting because these types of relationships that have these aspects tend to fulfill a woman's basic biological needs, which will naturally boost her fertility. So that's the way that I would interpret them. Now, you could also look at it from the supernatural perspective and think, well, Jupiter is the planet of blessings, and when it's conjunct the moon or when it's aspecting the moon, since moon is about femininity and motherhood, then you could also see it as blessing one with motherhood or something. If you want to look at motherhood as a blessing, that's a whole philosophical topic. But I would tend to, my tendency is always to look at what I can grasp in reality that backs up astrological placement. So that's how I see things. Then there's also, speaking of the topic of fertility, I haven't looked into this because it would take me forever in a day, but there are also more specific placements to look at from the Vedic perspective. There are these things called Bijasputa and Chitrisputa, these terms that are looked at from a man's perspective, from a woman's perspective, and then you have to look at their individual planetary placements that could hint towards what fertility issues they have. And conversely, of course, they can also score a level of fertility between the two of them based on their horoscope. But as far as I have looked at, again, I admit I have not done extensive studies. I looked at maybe, I don't know, a handful of horoscopes. But if I look at a handful of horoscopes and I already find contradicting evidence in, one or two of them, it already makes me doubt the entire theory. You know what I mean? And so I just remembered that I looked at things from that perspective and they didn't really add up, not to the extent that I had hoped. So I will stick to things that work, you know what I mean? And Jupiter with the moon in Synastry, whether in the composite or in Synastry, okay, I've seen it a lot to boost fertility. I've seen people who have children, and moon Mars, that's another one. Moon Mars aspect. Now, they don't have a moon Mars in the composite, but actually I didn't check. Do they have moon aspects? Actually, yes, they do. So he has his Mars trine her moon, again, provided that her time of birth is the one that I guessed it to be, and her moon is in Leo. And then from her perspective, she has Mars in Taurus, he has moon in Capricorn. So that's, they have a mutual Mars moon trine. So that would also boost fertility, right? It would have been even stronger in the composite. But I also think the composite Jupiter conjunct her moon, I think, is a very big one. And Pluto could have just added a transformational, would have just intensified the aspect and would have added that transformation aspect, And if you read Pluto as transformation and moon as the status of whether you're a mother or not, well, it would have literally translated into transforming her into a mother. But again, this is my perspective. Now, take it or leave it. I don't know. But going back to how his horoscope personally is impacted, aside from the fact that that would have been a boost of his confidence, and at the same time dredged up any father issues because his sun was conjunct the composite Pluto. Aside from that, so his moon is in Capricorn. And there is, the composite Mars-Venus would have been trine his moon. That would have helped, I think. And then there's the Saturn. The composite Saturn is conjunct his moon. And then there's composite Pluto conjunct his sun. Now, I think he could have very easily felt that this relationship was restricting him. That it was just, especially the aspect on the moon, may have made him feel that this is too much responsibility, that maybe this is too much work, that it's becoming too professional. That's another way to look at it. Then there's the Pluto that may have dredged up, potentially daddy issues, potentially mommy issues as well, because he also has Sun in the 4th house. And like I said, this usually shows a situation where the mother takes on the father role. So it's kind of like having two parents in one, or like the overlap between the mother and the father archetype. If you have this, sun in the fourth house, or if you have moon in the 10th house, same thing. But anyway, this is what I see. So I see it that from his perspective, either way, he was not as emotionally attached to the relationship. This is the bottom line. I mean, if you look at also, I was gonna check the moon situation. Yeah, so moon in Capricorn. Yeah, and if you look at it from her perspective, she has the Rahu influence, which is very strong. So the fact that her Rahu is conjunct the composite Venus Mars, this would have shown that she felt very strongly that this relationship was meant to lead her to her destiny. And from his perspective, composite Rahu and Jupiter are in Libra. Yes, this would have also meant, again, from his perspective, it would have been conjunct the composite moon. So this would have also really made him feel that, and again, his Jupiter conjunct the composite moon. I mean, even though they don't have the Jupiter moon aspect in composite, if you look at it from his chart to her chart to the composite chart, and from her chart to the composite chart, they have 3 Jupiter moon conjunctions in between the two of them. So no doubt this relationship would have stimulated the desire for parenthood, okay? And fertility from her perspective, I think, especially. Maybe also from his. But the bottom line is, from his perspective, I don't see him being that emotional about it. Like, somehow from her side, there's more of an emotional attachment. Probably because her moon, so in his case, his moon is conjunct the composite Saturn, which is actually stifling emotions. And not just that, but I forgot the important part. It's not just Saturn, it's Saturn with composite Ketu, which is, again, a diminishing aspect. I talked about this. I'm pretty sure actually, I don't know if I did. Did I? I don't remember. I think I did, though, because I remember I did aspects for all aspects between Rahu, Ketu, and the other planets. I think I covered them all. But either way, the short of it is, as you can imagine, moon conjunct Ketu shows that emotional attachment decreases over time. Now, according to, and this is why I think older astrological interpretations are not necessarily the best ones. This is why in the old, according to old traditional interpretations, having a woman's Rahu conjunct a man's Ketu, sorry, a man's moon is bad, because technically it means that the man will become more emotionally attached to her and more affectionate, and heaven forbid that should happen, right? You know what I mean, ladies? I mean, heaven forbid you should come across a man who might actually start to become very attentive to your needs. Now, the way that the traditional interpretations see it is more like, oh, the man is going to become too moody, too emotional, too whatever. That could also happen, that's true, but there are also positives to it. And on the one hand, the way to look at it is that if a man's moon is conjunct a woman's Rahu, the more they are together, the more attached he becomes. So what do you think is going to be more motivating for a man to stay in a relationship? To become emotionally attached or to not be emotionally attached? On the other hand, if a man's moon is conjunct a woman's Ketu, it means the longer they are together, the less emotionally attached he is to her. And in this case, if his moon is conjunct the composite Ketu, the less emotionally attached he becomes towards the relationship. So that means less emotional motivation to stay in the relationship. It makes sense, right? Now, traditional texts will tell you it's good to have a man's moon conjunct a woman's Ketu. because you want a man to not be emotional. But the problem is that if he's not emotional at all. Yes, he may not, cry if she doesn't call for 3 days, but then he won't cry if she gets hit by a bus either. So, I mean, this actually leads me to another idea that I mentioned at some point, which is that I don't think it's a coincidence that some of the most long-lasting and relatively sane relationships I've seen are between people who have no conjunctions involving Ketu or Rahu at all, because these, and again, I'm going to do a video about this at some point in the future, these are the most challenging aspects in Synastry. And even the positive ones can have challenging aspects, yeah, despite any positive parts that might come with them. Because there's an element of fatedness connected to Ketu and Rahu that, basically these are the aspects that people have the least control over. All the other aspects, you can sort of maneuver around them, you can control them, you can analyze them, but these ones, they have a fatedness associated with them. Anyway, my point is, if you look at it from his perspective, okay, his moon, which is the core of your emotional needs and everything, is not particularly positively stimulated by this relationship. Okay? And if you actually stop to think about it a little bit, it's not particularly positively influenced in Synastry in by comparison to her horoscope either, except for the trine from her Mars and a trine from her Sun. There aren't any strong moon influences, no influences on his moon, okay? So his emotions are not that involved. Like, they're not, her emotions very deeply affected, right? His Sun conjunct her moon, composite Jupiter-Pluto conjunct her moon, composite Venus and Mars square her moon. By the way, the square to her moon could have explained arguments, okay? But yeah, I'm just gonna leave it at that. I did videos on Mars moon aspects plenty of times, so you can look into that for more details. But the bottom line is, yeah, and also most importantly, I think that Pluto conjunct moon, because this moon Pluto is one of the most intensely binding emotional aspects ever. Intensely binding. Again, I have to do videos about it at some point in the future, once I regain my voice after recording for 5 hours straight. Okay, finally, this is pretty much what I wanted to say. Pretty much everything that I can see that is relevant about their composite. Of course, feel free to look at it with a fresh pair of eyes and let me know if I missed any important things in the comment section. So finally, I want to talk a little bit about the Guna Milan or Ashtakud points, which is a very Vedic system. I did mention I was going to talk about it a little bit. And I think in this case, you're going to see why in the past I did not, I mentioned this mainly for informational purposes, because this is a Vedic perspective, and it's mostly to show the fact that it's not always accurate. And in fact, a lot of the times it's not really. I've actually had comments like, I'm sorry that I'm offending people or something, but I go by what works. I've said this all the time. Like, I say this when people ask me, like, how come you say that you use Vedic astrology, but then you talk about composite charts and, asteroids and things that are not mentioned in Vedic astrology. Look, I put my own spin on things based on what works. And I do take into account, let's say, old-fashioned or traditional perspectives and interpretations. But if I do my own research and I see that it doesn't work, and I find, right off the bat, I will look at 5 horoscopes and I see that none of these traditional predictions work, then I tend to not take them very seriously. That being said, with this Guna Milan, there are times when it does bring valuable insights, but then there are times where, just like in this one, I think you will see that they're just not really on point. And I think I can understand the desire to create these systems because everybody would love for astrology, just like life in general, I think, to all be easily described through a series of mathematical equations and it would be great if we just had an algorithm that we could apply to astrology and every time we would get the same results. But that's not how astrology works. Yes, there are systems, maybe there are formulas that help you with finding the right answer, with giving the correct prediction, but you always have to look at things from a very holistic perspective. This is why reading a horoscope is so difficult, because there's literally countless influences on a person's horoscope in addition to life in general and the world in general and how that impacts the person. So it's not ever going to be a simple, clean-cut equation, if you ask me, or I don't see that happening in our lifetime. I don't know, maybe generations from now there will be some algorithm that shows you exactly what's going to happen based on your horoscope or something and shows you perfect synastry, but I don't think that is possible as of yet. That being said, I'm going to go through this Guna Milan score and I'm going to look at the things that I think are relevant. Obviously, right off the bat, you can see that this system scored their compatibility at 2.5 out of 36. One thing that I want to mention is that these are just when you look at them, so if you look at some basic interpretations, you can see that they're a little bit oversimplified. So for instance, the yoni, I mean, this is one that I talked about many times on my channel, and I'm sure people who come from Vedic astrology especially, you know about yoni compatibility. It basically refers to this system that allocates a different animal to each nakshatra, and this yoni basically is supposed to show a basic temperament, the basic mentality and nature, so to speak. I think if you were to look at I don't know, maybe a more westernized equivalent, it would be like a biorhythm, let's say, right? So like your natural flow and your natural type of frequency. And this is why the nakshatra that is the most important in Vedic astrology is the moon nakshatra, because the moon right off the bat shows your baseline personality. So it's your needs, it's your emotions, it's your thought patterns, right, to some extent. But it's not so much about ideas and conscious thoughts. It's more like repetitive knee-jerk reactions and your habits and the way you think, your basic temperament, right? So like even temperament, if you want to break it down, comes from a lot of thoughts and a lot of habits that have happened repeatedly over long periods of time, right? And so this yoni, based on its nature, will have different compatibilities. It even shows smexual compatibility, right? This is a big factor of the yoni compatibility thing. And as you can see, they have a 1 out of 4. Now, this is because her yoni is the male rat, his yoni is the male mongoose. But for instance, the Uttarashadha nakshatra, which he has, is the only nakshatra out of 27 that has it doesn't have a counterpart. So all the other nakshatras, as well, it's kind of expected because there were 27, so one of them had to be left without a partner. And Uttarashadha is that nakshatra that does not have a counterpart. All the other ones have male and female of the same animal, right? So there's a male yoni, a male rat yoni, there's a female rat yoni, right? Male lion yoni, female lion yoni, male sheep, female sheep, etc., right? But for Uttarashadha, there's a male mongoose, but there's no female mongoose, which I would argue is because of the nature of this nakshatra. It's a Brahmin nakshatra, it's a priestly nakshatra that is meant to focus on creativity and perfecting itself. And it's ruled by the sun, which I mentioned right off the bat, is the archetype that struggles a lot to find love because they're very self-motivated. And some people would tend to call them selfish, but the truth is that they are imbued with a huge amount of motivation and ambition for very good reason, because oftentimes they have to bring things into the world that have to be brought into the world. They have to be creative. And it's really in the best interest of everyone that people with potential meet their potential, you know. So the bottom line though is that in relationships, the sun dominant tend to struggle a lot, okay? And this nakshatra especially, being the last of the sun dominated nakshatras and being very focused on developing itself, spiritual development, it, yeah, will have a hard time right off the bat finding a decent compatible partner. And that doesn't mean, of course, that they should just give up. That's not what I'm trying to say. But right off the bat, this yoni compatibility, I would say, is not super relevant to look at with respect to this nakshatra, because no matter how you look at it, the Uttarashadha has to practice a lot of self-awareness and a lot of conscious effort in relationships in order to make them work. Whereas the yoni compatibility refers to an instinctive compatibility. It is true, of course, that with some nakshatras, they will have to work harder than with others, but they still have to work. And I think in his case, really just based on the vibe and the things I've seen in his horoscope, he's probably the kind of person that's just really, really self-absorbed. And I've seen this also a little bit because he has that, I think I should have mentioned that when I was doing the synastry, he has a moon Venus opposition in his natal horoscope. And I'm going to mention yet again another video that I did a long time ago where I talked about moon Venus, the challenges of moon Venus aspect in, the relationship challenges of people with moon Venus aspects in the natal chart. And I talked about how these people often struggle between either prioritizing themselves and becoming very self-centered, which I tend to think that's his case just based on vibe and what I've seen in his horoscope, or they take the complete opposite approach, which is they make the relationship all about the partner, but they have a hard time finding a balance between being able to be themselves in a relationship and also being able to have the harmony necessary, right? So like do the work of including their partner in their lives as well. I've also mentioned in that video that, for instance, Tom Cruise has the conjunction. The conjunction is the strongest aspect, but I've seen this to some extent happen with anyone who has. I would say the opposition would be the second aspect to look at because it's the second strongest. To some extent, you could also see this with the square and with the trine and the sextile even, but to much lesser extents. So it's less likely to be problematic with the trine and the sextile. But with the conjunction, especially with the opposition and square to a lesser extent, you will see this difficulty of the person. It's almost kind of like they have a hard time seeing beyond themselves. And I realize that maybe it sounds a bit negative. Well, not a bit. It sounds pretty negative, but I'm sure that if you take some time and you look around, I would argue that this is so if you take some time and you look around and you see people who have these combinations, you will see these kinds of patterns that they tend to be really self-absorbed. And I would argue that it stems from childhood issues because, again, the moon is the mother figure. It's nurturing. And already, I have to say, from Tim Burton's horoscope, there's already some indicators that he had some issues with his parents, some significant mother and or daddy issues. Actually, I would say probably mostly mother issues, just because the father seemed more absent. But aside from that, this on a psychological level, the moon Venus would show that this is a person who needs to be mothered in love, especially if this is a man, because the Venus is the woman archetype, is the wife archetype in his horoscope, and it's the wife archetype is blending with the mother archetype here when the moon and the Venus are aspecting one another. And so these are the kind of men who can oftentimes want to be very pampered. They need to feel like they are, just like the mother would ideally make the child feel like they are the center of her life and the center of her, the apple of her eye and all that. And yeah, I would argue that in his case, this is an issue because yeah, he probably failed to see that his partner has the same amount of needs. And my point being that added to this yoni incompatibility and his Uttarashadha situation, his nakshatra being Uttarashadha, it would have made him that less in touch with her feelings. Oh, there's another thing that I should have looked at, but I didn't. And that's also very important to take into account. Now, sorry that I'm mentioning these right at the topic of the Guna Milan, but I just remembered there's the topic, and of course, some of you know that. So, if you've watched some of my videos, I did a video again ages ago where I talked about secrets of the moon incompatibility. And one of them is the distance of. So, again, in heterosexual couples, this is very important for heterosexual couples. I'm not sure if it's particularly important for the other like non-straight couples, but when you take into account a woman's biological needs and a man's biological needs and the differences between them, the distance from the woman's moon to the man's moon should not be longer than the other way around. Basically, that is the general idea. So in other words, ideally, the distance from the man's moon to the woman's moon, because this is normally how you have to look at it, from his moon to her moon, looking strictly at the sign placements, you shouldn't go more than 4 signs away from his moon to her moon, ideally. It's still acceptable up until 6 signs. Once it crosses 180 degrees, it means that the distance from her moon to his moon is shorter than the other way around. Okay? And this is their situation. So she has moon in Leo. Even if her moon were in Cancer, let me start by saying this. So even if she had been born around midnight, she would still be in the same position from this perspective, from the moon distance perspective. Because she would have had her moon in the after over 20 degrees Cancer, and he has his moon in the early degrees of Capricorn. So the distance from his moon to her moon is over 180 degrees, basically. So this means that he's not able to understand her needs. This is why this is important. This configurations, however you want to call it, not configuration, but an aspect, right, of compatibility that is important to look at. It's important because technically, and yeah, in reality, I mean, if you look around, men are already less in touch with their feelings. They already have a hard time understanding women's feelings and women's needs. But when they also don't have their moon distance, so the distance from her moon to his moon being shorter than the other way around, they really are in the blind. Like, they don't understand the woman's needs, right? They're not easily in touch with her needs emotionally and instinctively. They won't be able to even meet her halfway a lot of the times. And oftentimes what happens is that the woman feels like she can understand him and she anticipates his needs, but never the other way around. So this puts her in a situation where she feels like he's a child, like almost like she's the mother and he's the child. And again, I hate to go Freudian, but really things are adding up against Burton, him having potentially significant mommy issues here. Because it's showing up from all perspectives now that he was comfortable with a woman who, kind of maybe doted on him and pampered him in some ways, at least emotionally. Because on the other hand, so if a man's moon, from the distance from a man's moon to a woman's moon is short, so that means that if, let's say, a man, like in this situation, he has his moon in 0 degrees Capricorn, so if her moon, it would be no further away than, I think, 3 degrees Taurus, right? That would put it within the first 4 signs after his moon. So that would mean that he would be able to understand her needs and anticipate her needs. He would be connected to her emotionally. But the other way around, right? It means that his emotions don't, like, I know it's a roundabout way to explain this, but somehow it's almost like his emotions or his intuition doesn't reach that far to understand her emotions, because moon to moon interactions are very psychic, very intuitive, very purely emotional, because it's, about subconscious intuitive interactions. And so basically the bottom line is that, according to theory and according to reality again, women already have an easier time understanding a man's needs, right? So they don't need any more help in that department. But a man, on the other hand, he could use all the help he can get, because men naturally do not understand women's needs. I mean, hello, this is why natality is going down all over the world. And basically, this is a bad thing to have in relationships. This is the part where I agree with traditional teachings, because I've seen this time and again where, and don't get me wrong, partially agree at least, because there are multiple aspects to look at this from. But most of the times when you look at it from the woman's perspective, they tend to not be happy in these relationships. Most of the times. Because women need to feel like a man is always there to take care of them if they fall. Like, women need to feel like a man is a backup. He's always there to catch her if she falls. But in this situation, oftentimes the woman doesn't feel that way. She feels more like she has to take care of him. She has to constantly worry about things that, a woman in a healthier relationship would not have to worry about. So overall, their yoni situation is not good. But I have seen cases where couples have had less than perfect yoni scores, and they're still, they have been together for a very long time, because again, you have to look at the entire nuances of synastry and everything else. One thing that is really important to look at is the Nadi Kut, which is the progeny. I've mentioned this in other situations, that in other synastries of famous people that I've done, that this is an aspect that I normally look at when it comes to things like not compatibility, but fertility issues, or people having children that have health issues and stuff like that. I have seen this, for instance, with a few couples, for instance, who have had issues with, kids having disabilities. One case where the child died before the age of 5. And I don't want to be like, the bringer of bad news, and I don't want to, quite the contrary. The reason I'm doing this and I'm showing this aspect is to show that it's oftentimes very fatalistic, because just like you see with this couple, they have no score. So they have like a 0 out of 8 for the progeny aspect of the relationship, and yet they have 2 healthy children that were conceived naturally. And in my opinion, this is because of all the things that I noticed in their composite chart, that I noticed in their, synastry in between their 2 horoscopes, which I would argue add to a much greater degree of, fertility than just calculating this one thing, looking at it from a very sort of limited perspective, if you will. Then there's the Gana. I've talked about the Gana, I think, also in that video where I talked about Secrets of Moon. Now, I mentioned this, and again, this is the part where, with peace and love, again, not to throw shade, because obviously I've learned a lot from traditional teachings, but this is my part where I have to be objective, and I have to say that some things need to be updated, right? It's also one of the reasons why I don't really follow any organized religion, because religions are stuck in 2000 BCE or or I don't know, 800 AD or whatever. Like, they're not updated to the world that we live in. They, they look at things from a very kind of narrow-minded perspective, and they don't update the information according to the world that we currently live in. And this example, for instance, with the Ghana is one that I can think about, because you will oftentimes read descriptions that say, well, if the woman is a demon or a Rakshasa, then she has to be with a man who is a Rakshasa as well. Now, the reason why this was the way it was based on very traditional gender roles and very traditional, and by traditional, I even hate using the word traditional when it comes to these things, because let's call it what it is. It was just basically the institutionalized, how should I put it, oppression of women that has been normalized throughout humankind, basically, since the dawn of time. And it was based on the idea that a man needed to dominate his wife. And so the Rakshasa woman, being considered to be the most fierce, Rakshasa or demon, they're considered to be the most quote-unquote savage or fierce nakshatras. It is considered that only a man who is also a Rakshasa could, quote-unquote, tame a Rakshasa woman. But in today's world, you see that plenty of Rakshasa women, are content in relationships with men who are Manushas or Devas, because maybe they would rather be with a partner who is more, I don't know, elevated, more gentle, more, how should I put it? Yeah, just not aggressive, basically. So a lot depends on individual preferences, really, a lot. Now, of course, you could also argue, just like I mentioned previously, due to social pressures and whatnot, sometimes men will feel like they're not manly enough if they're in a relationship with a Rakshasa, or they will face scrutiny or they will face criticism if they are with a woman who seems to be the more dominant one in the relationship, etc., right? And yeah, there are different aspects to take into account, really. So I don't think it's set in stone. And you could argue, well, they did separate eventually, so maybe there was some truth to it. Yeah, but in the grand scheme of things, they had a lot of things that worked well for them, really. I mean, and also the relationship did last for a very long time, so it's not like they were completely incompatible. If you were to look at this score, I mean, the score is like 2.5 out of 36, and this takes into account everything. It takes into account time of birth as well, which I know you're going to argue, well, the time of birth is not accurate, but the time of birth is not even relevant for most of these. So I mean, for instance, the one that does this, the Rakshasa thing, it does take into account the time of birth, because if she were born in Ashlesha, right, she wouldn't be a Rakshasa, she would be a Manushya, because Ashlesha is a Manushya, meaning if her moon were in Cancer, because it's not 100% sure that it's not, but I would argue it isn't. So, bottom line, though, I think that the relevant part here, so, and also if you look at affection, right, so they have, like, affection is based on the lords of the moon. So the fact that she has moon in Leo, and he has moon in Capricorn, and it's ruled by Saturn, and her moon is ruled by Sun. So it gets a 0 because Sun and Saturn are enemies, okay? But, and to some extent, in a roundabout way, you could argue that this is pretty accurate, but, and also because they have that Simha and Makara, so again, this is based on, Simha is Leo, and Makara, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, is Capricorn. And it gets a 0 because these signs don't really have anything in common, okay? And also their lords are enemies. But, again, if you look at their individual inter-aspects, there were loads of very positive aspects, loads of very binding aspects that showed attraction and affection and all that. So you have to kind of question these things, really. And yeah, the part about compassion, I guess this is mutual understanding. They have like an average score there. And here's the thing, the one that I object to a lot of these, but the one about the Varna Kud, about aptitude, this has to deal with their ability to work together, which again, if you looked at their horoscopes, right? And not just forget about their horoscopes. I mean, if you look at them as a couple, clearly you can see that they worked well together. Were there challenges along the way? I'm sure there were, according to her, according to rumors, whatever. Who doesn't have challenges? But were the challenges worth it? Yes. I mean, they worked together successfully, professionally. They boosted each other's careers. So, I mean, clearly this is too fatalistic to just look at it from just some simple calculations, okay? And just from very, kind of tiny individual pieces of information that you gather from the horoscope, like sign rulership and stuff like this. So I would argue, again, looking at it from a holistic perspective is the most important thing. And one thing that I wanted to say is, for instance, with the progeny, this is the one that I do take into account when it comes to the Guna Milan score all the time. Because I, in all fairness, have seen cases where, like, I don't know if I mentioned this, but because I've been recording for so long that I forgot. I forgot what day it is. But I have seen cases, where people have had troubled births with this, even when they had Moon Jupiter conjunct in the composite. Even when they had, I literally know a couple who has Moon Jupiter and Moon Mars conjunct in the composite, and they had a child who died of cancer at a very young age. And yeah, so it doesn't, and they had no problems conceiving. Yes, that is true. But the children, and not just one of them died and the other one was sick for a very long time. Eventually, they became a healthy adult, but they were sick. And yes, these are people that I know, people whose times of birth I know, okay? My point being that you have to look at things from a holistic point of view. Okay, is it possible that having a low progeny score could bring problems in terms of progeny? Yes. It doesn't mean that it's, going to be 100% a bad scenario. No, because you have to look at the full picture, right? So like you see in their case, it has not affected them at all. Really, they have 2 healthy kids. Hopefully their kids will live long, happy lives. All right, this has been pretty much my interpretation. Very, very long video. I hope that you had the appropriate amount of popcorn to listen to this. Also, give yourself a nice big pat on the back for listening to the whole thing. Thank you very much for listening. And of course, please share your feedback, as long as you keep it respectful towards the rest of the commenters and myself and the content and the craft of astrology. I don't need to mention that. And also, of course, if you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe. If you haven't subscribed, please like the video, share it with anyone else that might be interested in astrology. Click on the notifications bell if you want to be notified when I upload a new video. And then, of course, if you're interested in a private astrology reading, I do readings, consultations, however you want to call them, on a large number of subjects. And there are always new subjects that I could do readings on. I've actually had a lot of people ask for customized stuff and whatever. If you're curious, though, I have a list of general readings that I offer. You can send me an email. I can send you the pricing list and the reading options and all that. And I always mention this because I have people commenting. I do not spam people, because I know some people are nervous about sending an email thinking that I'm gonna, save their email and spam them with information. No, I do not do that. If you're curious, you can send me an email, ask me for the information that you are curious about. I will do my best to answer as quick as I can. And that's it. If you're not interested, you're not interested. And aside from that, I also have a membership section. Of course, I have not posted, I will be honest, I haven't posted in over a month there. I, again, have a long list of ideas of things that I want to post about. I will be posting something very soon in the membership section. And yeah, either way though, if you want to become a member, I already have a lot of videos in the membership section, and you can look for them if you go to my channel and you search for, I think there's a section where you can see the members only videos. If not, you can also click on the playlists. I have the playlists written down in the description, where you can see the list of videos with all the titles that I did in the membership sections for each tier of the membership section. And you can also find more information in the introductory part of this video. Aside from that, I also have a tarot channel. Many of you know that. It's called Martine's Tarot. I've started that channel way more recently than this one. So I started this channel in 2016, and I started the tarot channel in, I think, 2022. I think, or maybe 2023. I'm not even sure. I lost track. I think it was 2022. Anyway, yeah, it's more recent, but again, if you're interested in tarot, go ahead and check it out. I will be linking it in the video description. Maybe subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you very much for listening, and yeah, I hope to see you again on my astrology channel.